Welcome to the Jamal Thomas Morning Show. My name is Jamal Thomas. This is indeed my show. We can even say it's our show because I can't necessarily have this show if you weren't here watching and joining me as I do the news. I hope you guys have a good morning or had a good night leading into this particular morning. It's early, slightly dragon-esque a little bit, but I'm here nonetheless, and I'm glad that you guys are here with me. Interesting news has taken place. Of course, we were talking about yesterday with Joe Biden approving long-range strikes into Russia. This, of course, is a fail on so many levels. As I pointed out, Joe Biden lost the election. And in losing the election, one of the items that were litigated in that election is foreign policy. Which foreign policy do you agree with? Continued escalation and inability to come to any sort of terms of peace in general, especially for a war that we propagated, a war that we pushed. For God's sake, it is not Russia that is at the border of Texas. It is NATO that is expanded to the border of Russia. It wasn't Russia that knocked over Mexico. It was the US and NATO knocking over the legitimate democratically elected government of Ukraine, putting in basically a bunch of neo-Nazis that has led to all sorts of drama and chaos and death ever since. So, in a war that Joe Biden clearly lost, that NATO clearly lost, their objective was to destroy the Russian economy, to destroy the Russian military, and neither of those things took place. Instead, you have a Europe that has been deindustrialized, a Europe that is in political chaos, and a failing government in the United States where the majority of the American public chose to vote for Trump. And for whatever his failings, one of his main things that he was actually right on was we need to stop the death. We need to stop the carnage. Joe Biden, not deterred by losing and having the American public effectively tell it or give it a no confidence vote, has decided to escalate the conflict and escalated in a way that Russia had called a red line. If missiles are fired by NATO, which is exactly what it would be, it won't be Ukraine firing those missiles. It has to be NATO firing those missiles. Then we will be at war. And to make the point clear, Russia was arguing and debating on whether or not to change its nuclear doctrine. Putin, when this first came up, said this.
In the updated version of the document, aggression against Russia by any non-nuclear state, but with the support of a nuclear state, is proposed to be considered as their joint attack on Russia. Russia will also consider the possibility of using nuclear weapons when receiving reliable information about a massive launch of means of aerospace attack and their crossing of our state border. This includes strategic and tactical aircraft, as well as cruise missiles and drones, hypersonic and other delivery vehicles. Russia reserves the right to use nuclear weapons in case of aggression.
I hope you heard that. Russia reserves the right to use nuclear weapons if we are attacked with the help of a nuclear power. Meaning, if you attack us and we know you're working with a nuclear power, then we are perfectly okay with lowering the threshold of our nuclear weapons in order to respond. Russia considers this existential, and it is responding as if it is existential because this is taking place on their border. And the integrity of the state, just like the integrity of the US, from our point of view, will be maintained with all options on the table. It came out last night that Russia has updated their nuclear threshold policy. So this wasn't Putin just talking. This was also them doing. Vladimir Putin has approved an updated nuclear doctrine saying that Russia could consider using nuclear weapons if it is subjected to a conventional missile attack on it, supported by a nuclear power. And considering that all of NATO is involved in this. Britain, France, and the US have nuclear weapons. From Russia's point of view, you all are fair game. You all are attacking us. You all have been warned. And now you are effectively allowing Ukraine to attack Russia proper. This is a red line. Now, they thought Russia was bluffing when it first rolled into Ukraine, when it kept saying, we need to come to some agreement. You are edging on our existential existence. You're causing a problem in your attacks on us. And what I mean by that is the ignoring and blowing off the Minsk agreements, the overthrow of the Ukrainian government in 2014, putting in a bunch of Banderites and neo-Nazis into the leading positions of that particular government, and the blowing off of the Istanbul agreements, meaning every agreement that potentially was struck in order to end the conflict was used either as a way to give time for the Ukrainian military to build up its military arsenal, or were just fundamentally blown off. And so now that the war is taking place, and now that Ukraine is losing territory, losing manpower, and fundamentally losing the war, Joe Biden has decided to not go into that good night and accept the loss, or for that matter, have a conscience and bring this war to a close, considering the number of people, the hundreds of thousands of people that have been killed in this war. Joe Biden has decided we are going to escalate. We're not going to take a loss and go into this good night, despite the fact that the American public has given Joe Biden a no confidence vote and has effectively voted for the guy who said he's going to end the war. Early on, Donald Trump came out, and I don't know when this clip came out because Donald Trump was putting out many videos, but Donald Trump came out and said this. And by the way, everything he's saying in this clip is true. The question is, what does Trump do when he gets in office? And that is the thing that everybody is waiting on and everybody wants to know. Because the thing with Trump, he says so many different things, it's hard to know what he's saying. By the same token, he has been consistent for the most part on one specific point. And that is that Joe Biden is bringing us to the brink of war. This was Trump. I believe this was before the election, but I don't exactly know the exact date of when he said this, but this is Trump.
Under Joe Biden, the world has become vastly more dangerous, and there is no greater danger than the deadly menace of
this one.
Been closer to World War III than we are today under Joe Biden. A global conflict between nuclear armed powers would mean death and destruction on a scale unmatched. We have never been closer to World War III than we are today under Joe Biden. A global conflict between nuclear armed powers would mean death and destruction on a scale unmatched in human history. It would be nuclear Armageddon. Nothing is more important than avoiding that nightmare. We will avoid it, but we need new leadership. Every day this proxy battle in Ukraine continues, we risk global war. We must be absolutely clear that our objective is to immediately have a total cessation of hostilities. All shooting has to stop. This is the central issue. We need peace without delay. In addition, there must also be a complete commitment to dismantling the entire globalist neocon.
All right, he's going to go into fighting the globalists. He's going to go into all that. But he's right. I don't know when Trump made this statement, but the statement is completely and fundamentally true. And it is more true today than it was back then. When I pointed out before, I've said it on more than one occasion, that when Joe Biden has been one of the worst presidents we've ever had in this administration. And a choice like this on his way out after losing the race is part of my reason for saying stuff like that. All things being equal, Joe Biden, knowing full well the Russian response, has made this choice. And maybe Svoboda is right that he made this choice thinking, well, Putin knows that Trump is coming in. He knows that Trump said he wanted to end the war. So we're going to take this particular policy. Russia has been able to effectively neutralize the attack Adams missiles for the most part. And in the context of that neutralization, maybe Putin doesn't necessarily want to take that extra step of going further, knowing that administration is going to come in and wants to effectively change the context of the war, basically to end the war. I don't know if that's true. I would say that the fact that Putin's immediate response was to warn the various nations to A, change the doctrine immediately, and B, to warn other nations, look, you better pay close attention to what we are saying here. We are not screwing around. We are not going to allow NATO to attack Russian soil, full stop, or any more than it's been doing so with Ukraine as a proxy. Now, we can think they're joking, or we can continue in this framework. And, one of my big questions early on was how far is Joe Biden willing to go? Meaning the moment that the US knows it's lost, which it knows, the moment that it knows that Ukraine is losing manpower, which it knows, and that it has no capability to conventionally change the context of the battlefield by giving it more money, guns, or weapons, then what does the US do? And that has been a looming question for me going back for the last several years when it became very clear that they were going to lose this war. Would they accept the loss and call it a day, or will they continue to try and escalate even to the point of getting further more ingratiated into the conflict? And what it looks like is that Joe Biden decides that he wants to get further involved into the conflict. Now, the catch becomes, A, they don't have a huge number of attack Adams missiles in the first place. B, the missiles have been somewhat marginalized in regards to the Russian capability of cutting down on the capability of those missiles. And I'm saying that poorly, but effectively the capability of the attack Adams missiles has been wanting. That said, that's almost secondary to the point that no air defense is perfect, and that if one of those missiles hits Moscow, or one of those missiles hits something of significance, all hell will break loose. And they have made it clear that their targets will not be isolated to Ukraine, or for that matter, that targets of bases all around the world are at risk. This is a very dangerous time. And incompetence in the White House is making this worse. And I do not have this blanket relief with the Trump either, to be honest, because I don't necessarily think Trump knows all of this stuff chapter and verse, and hubris would lead us to horrible outcomes, whether that's hubris from a Joe Biden, or even whether that's hubris from a Trump who claimed he's going to end the war, he's going to end the war. Again, all of that depends on how you end it. The devil's in the details. And up to this point, we have no leverage in real terms, in the conventional sense, in this situation to change the context of that war. And that terrifies me to no end. We have incompetent leadership. And unfortunately, we most likely will have incompetent leadership coming in office when Trump takes office also. My concern in this, though, or at the very least my want, as I pointed out before, I have very little expectations for Trump coming into office. The one thing that he has been consistent on is that the level of death and destruction in this war needs to come to an end. And if he does nothing but that, at the very least, from my point of view, that will be a positive. Up to this point, Joe Biden has decided to escalate. And as I said before, it is a dangerous time going from the lame duck president that is half dead and will be out off this planet within 10 years, taking us into what could be a complete disaster that he himself will not have to endure going forward, but all of us will. This is very dangerous. And from Russia's point of view, they've made their response clear. changing nuclear doctrine. I want to bring in our guests. We are joined with the great, the one and only, Carl Jha. Carl, man, thank you for joining me, man. I always appreciate the conversations with you. We're going to get into the APEC summit with China and the conversation that took place between Joe Biden and China on the sidelines. But just to introduce you, Carl Jha is host of Silk and Steel podcast, focused on China and surrounding regions and their history, culture, and politics. You can follow Carl on Twitter at Carl Jha, and you can follow his podcast on Twitter. On Twitter, Carl Jha, and follow the podcast on Twitter at Steel Silk In, and subscribe and support their podcast on Patreon at Silk and Steel. Carl, man, thank you for joining me. How you doing this morning? You doing all right?
I'm doing great. Well, it's actually my evening time. We're flipped. We're 13 hours apart. So
we are indeed 13 hours apart. I'm sorry. I always get that wrong when I bring people on this American-centric point of view. But no, man, thank you for joining me. I do appreciate it. I saw that Joe Biden. Now, I want to show you this. This is where we are today with our president. It is not the most glorious thing in the world. It's kind of humiliating, actually, when you think about it. But the leader of the free world gets ignored in a photo shoot. And apparently he gets there late and everyone just leaves. Look at this. This is astonishing. So this is C-SPAN. All of the leaders, they take their picture. Biden is not here. And what you hear is all of these reporters screaming, and they're effectively saying, wait a minute, the leader of the free world is not there yet. The leader of the free world is not there. And instead of them waiting, they just mosey on and leave. That's where we are today. They don't even wait for the president of the US to show up to a photo shoot of world leaders at the G20. Just astonishing. Carl, are we looking at, oh, you guys can't see it. I'm sorry. There we are. Carl, are we looking at a changeover in the way that the world considers US leadership? I've never seen a situation like this. I mean, they are literally leaving a photo shoot that is supposed to be of all the world leaders, and they didn't wait or even seem to care that Joe Biden was not there. That's just astonishing.
To be honest, Jamal, I don't think Joe Biden even knows. I don't think Joe Biden himself even knows.
I have never seen anything like this. There's Xi Jinping. We saw MBS. He's back there. And the reporter is like screaming. They're like, wait a minute. The president is not there. The president is not there. And they just mosey on along. Just astonishing stuff.
The president hasn't been there for a long time, Jamar. And
it's true.
You know, it's been a walking zombie for 4 years, and now he's a walking zombie on his way out. Who cares?
Lame duck.
And I mean, it gets even more ridiculous because this at the recent meeting in APEC meeting in Peru, China just inaugurated a $3.5 billion megaport that will be China's logistic hub for all of South America. It will shave the shipping from Brazil to Shanghai by 15 days. This is a big deal. And then not to be outdone, we have Tony Blinken the next day delivering a speech where he said the U.S. will pledge support to build a passenger railway line for Lima, the capital of Peru. Sounds good, right? Sounds really good until you dig into the details. And then you realize what he's really talking about is the Caltrans has just recently electrified their lines. So they have a bunch of obsolete old diesel engine rail cars they need to get rid of. So they sold them to Peru for $6 million. So this is what Blinken is billing as a win. I mean, how does that even compare to what China has done? I mean, we're talking about magnitude differences here. First of
Yeah,
all,
it doesn't.
U.S. did not help Lima build a rail line. They just sold a bunch of old, obsolete rail cars for $6 million. And then China built this 3.5 billion megaport and $1 billion of investment on top of it. It does not. That will transform the whole landscape of how commerce is done in in South America.
No.
U.S. is a joke right now. I mean, when they do things like this, why should anyone even pay attention what Biden is doing when he himself doesn't even know what he's
What's
doing?
wild about that? I saw Blinken's response, and I thought the exact same thing. Megaport. I mean, it's hard to get across how big this port is, and it basically allows China to ingratiate itself to South America. It makes this major allowance of trade relationships between South America and China. And what's wild about it too, China apparently has also allowed tariff-free goods to be imported into China from countries that are low economic yield countries. And again, this is massive. If you're talking about Africa or even places in South America that don't necessarily have a huge amount of trade, well, this is going to boost it significantly. And this port is going to be a gateway to doing so. And yeah, I saw Blinken's thing and I thought of it the same way. It's like China says, here's this megaport that we're releasing. And Blinken comes out, hey, we're also doing stuff in South America. Here's our thing that we're doing in South America. Okay, man, those things don't really compete with one another, but fair enough if that's what you need to do in order to not look bad. All of this is a weird face-saving mechanism that didn't really even need to take place. So what? China has made a major megaport and it's working with Peru and South America. Okay, great. Why do you need to add 2 cents into this to make it look like you're doing something too? Like, it comes across looking weak, not strong. And it doesn't come across as if you're saving face. It comes across as if somebody has done something great and you're yapping in the corner that you are also doing big stuff on the sidelines. It just comes across poorly, as opposed to just saying, yeah, China did a megaport. Good job. It's just weird. It's insecure. It's very strange.
I mean, that has been the U.S. government for the past decades. You know, they repeatedly say we gotta forward deploy our military posture in East Asia to reinforce our credibility. We got to show our strength. Look, if you're a really strong person, if you're Mike Tyson, you don't need to go around the world and announce people how great you are. You don't need to go flex in front of every camera. Everyone know, oh my God, you're a great Mike Tyson. You don't need to even advertise yourself.
It's bizarre. It's like, I'm trying to think of a really good analogy. It's like somebody comes out and they do something big, whatever it is. I cured cancer. And then you have somebody else who's also in the field of medicine, very insecure, saying, yeah, but, we were able to infect mice with this bacteria. Aren't you also happy? And it's like, okay, dude, you don't need to tell me that. The guy that cured cancer. Give him his props. You don't need to necessarily try to chime in about something that you also did that doesn't quite compare because you're insecure about the fact that this guy was able to do something big. It's that part. It's these weird face-saving maneuvers that don't really save face, and if anything, highlight the fact that you've been somewhat outdone on this issue. What is this port in Peru going to mean for trade between China and South America? Because I would imagine the U.S. is going to feel some kind of way about it. And you would be shocked at some of the reporting here. Some of the reporting came out, it says something like China builds a base in the US's backyard. As if Peru belongs to America. Just like the way we think about this stuff is astonishing. What is this port going to mean between trade between not just Peru and China, but also South America and China?
The Chancay port is 6,000 kilometers away from U.S. and then because they consider that U.S. backyard. And this is actually pretty big for all of South America because on top, it's not just the megaport. There's also the transcontinental highway that connects Brazil's Amazonian region to the Pacific coast of Peru. So now all the goods from Northeast Brazil previously they would take a roundabout way to either loop around the tip of South America to go into Pacific to China, or to go through the Caribbean, through the Panama Canal. When there's traffic, they have to wait to pass through the Panama Canal, and then maybe go to port in Mexico and United States, and then put everything in container ship, then ship to Shanghai. Now they can just ship directly through from Brazil's Amazon on this cross-continental highway to ports in Peru, loaded on container. By the way, this port is fully automated. They have like fully automated cranes, and so the new Peruvian employee who got hired by the port authority, all they got to do is just sit in the air control room, work on through remote control of the whole port operation through the 5G network built by Huawei. And this is amazing stuff. And Peru, like the people in Peru, they said themselves, Peru used to be kind of the center of South America, whether from the Inca Empire days or the Spanish colonial era. Peru was the center. This port will help Peru to become the center hub again, because 40 to 60% of the traffic that's going to go through the Chancay port is going to come in from other countries like Bolivia, which doesn't have a port access, Brazil, Chile, and this is going to revitalize the economy of the whole region. The port is initially set to handle 1 million be able to handle 1 million ton container ship. Like the world's largest container ship will be able to park in this port. So this is huge. It shaves the whole traffic from northeast Brazil to Shanghai about 15 days. So, for like perishable goods, like especially agricultural products, which in South America is known for, now they have a new market in Shanghai. Just by the virtue of this new port and cutting the shaving off of the time in transit. So this is a big deal. This is a big deal, which makes Tony Blinken even more ridiculous.
Just think, if we didn't spend $10 trillion blowing up Afghanistan and Iraq, what we could have done with that money. Like, it kills me, man. Like, that is money that we just pissed away. And China is building megaports and infrastructure around the globe. I mean, it's not just here, it's also in Africa, where they've built all of this infrastructure and everything else, ingratiating themselves into those countries, not in a war way, but in an infrastructure, in a, we're building things way. I mean, it's just, God, I hate the way we use our resources. And I would imagine this also adds into the whole BRICS issue, right? I mean, whether it's the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the Belt and Road, they are creating pathways for their goods to get from point A to point B that cuts costs and makes it easier for those goods to move from point A to point B. I mean, this is not just a random thing. They're doing this with this notion of getting closer to these various countries around the globe. And it just so happened that Brazil is part of BRICS. And it just so happens that China is part of BRICS. And it just so happened that Brazil is in South America, and this port is opening in South America. I don't think it's random. I guess my point is, one of the interesting things about the European Union is that all of them are closely linked, meaning all of those countries are right beside each other. So it makes common sense for them to kind of work together. Same thing with America, Canada, and Mexico. Again, it makes sense. All of them are on the same continent, etc. The weirdness with BRICS was that these countries were spaced all around the world. Iran, Saudi Arabia, and then you get Brazil, South Africa, China, Russia. And so it's like, okay, well, all of these countries are so far apart, they're going to have different, let's say, spheres of influence and different things that they need. How does this work? Okay, and I think this port shows how it works. We are going to link all of these countries together by air, sea, and land routes. We're going to make this work. We're going to be working together in coordination with one another. And I would put to you that this port is one of the ways of doing that. Correct me if I'm wrong on this. I mean, I would imagine this had to be one of the things they were concerned about. Okay, we're far apart. How are we going to make this work in regards to trade, And basically, how are we going to be in close association, even though our geographical land masses are far apart? And I guess this port is one of the answers to that question. But correct me if I'm wrong on that.
Well, first of all, BRICS is not a regional like a forum anymore. It's not like NAFTA, which is just North America. BRICS is now like all global. And what made BRICS is possible is actually U.S. interventionist foreign policy, because U.S. for the past decade has been sabotaging all the international institutions and forums that U.S. itself had helped to build after World War II. U.S. basically neutered UN. Like they kind of veto everything that criticized Israel. That they're rejecting the international court ruling on Israel. So all these international institutions that U.S. itself helped to build, now they're jettisoning it because they feel, okay, this no longer suit our needs, so it doesn't apply to us. The rule-based international order is for you, not for me. And this is why people are seeking alternatives. This is why people are turning to BRICS. And what China's Build and Road initiative is designed to do is build more interconnectivity all across the globe. U.S. positioned this way as, China is expanding its influence. Well, of course, every nation is trying to do the same, except U.S. do it through bombing and China do it through trade. And U.S. bombs, China builds almost became a cliche. It's a meme now. And this is why China were able to do it successfully, is because people want ports, people want roads, people want infrastructure.
Right.
And this is what China's proposed as a win-win solution. Go ahead.
No, please continue.
Oh. Yeah, I mean, BRICS originally came about as an acronym coined by Goldman Sachs to describe like emerging economy. It was like a gimmick for stock market, but it became a reality because of the U.S. foreign policy. It drove Russia and China and Iran together, and at the same time, China is powering the growth of a lot of the emerging economies like Brazil, like South Africa, because China is importing a lot. Many of these countries are commodity producers, and China imports a lot of commodities. Right. And Brazil in particular, because United States used to be one of the largest exporter of agricultural products, especially corn and soybean, to China. But because of the U.S. trade war on China, it's forcing China to look for alternative. And guess what? Brazil produce corn, soybean in large quantities. So now China is sourcing a lot of its agricultural needs from Brazil instead, because Brazil, unlike United States, is a friendly country. It's part of the BRICS. The same goes for other Argentinian, other South American countries. So this is where this is a big difference between U.S. and Chinese approach, and also by building the global connectivity, it's a port. A port, it doesn't just say only Chinese ship can dock at this port. A port, it's connect everyone. Everyone can come and trade, and that is the whole point. Increasing global connectivity is good, whereas U.S. is doing opposite. U.S. now are trying to close down the borders. They're trying to raise the tariffs. They're trying to build the barrier, building the trade barrier, building the trade wall around United States and also its European allies. I call them vassal states, and that's why they're go ahead.
But it's weird, right? I mean, because I think what the U.S. is hitting its head on is that there's a contradiction between what is in its political interests versus what is in its economic interests. And what I mean by that is, for the longest time, we were fine with this notion of trading with China, getting the benefits from that trade with China. And while that was happening, China was getting stronger. I mean, it's like, okay, well, you're going to send all of these American companies into China. Fair enough. Those companies are going to make a ton of money. Fair enough. And just so happened, as they were making the money, China was also becoming a stronger political, economic, industrial power as they were making that money. And none of them had issues with it while they were reaping the benefits off of it. Somewhere along the way, the political branch was like, hey, China is becoming a much stronger country. They seem to be growing economically, industrially, and politically, and by virtue of that, militarily. We don't like that. And the rules that have allowed China in order to do that, those rules need to now change because they don't advantage us in a political sense. Okay, well, the horse is out the barn. It's too late. Now the political branch is like, okay, now we need to raise walls. We need to pass sanctions. We need to create tariffs. We need to somehow go after countries that are working with China in this way. And it's like, yeah, but the reason you guys were working with China is because there was an economic benefit for you doing so, meaning those corporations that give you all those tax, that gives you all the money and everything else, they benefited from that. The American public benefited with cheap goods. And now you're saying, okay, now we need to change this. Okay, yeah, that's please.
I think there are many layers of this onion, right? I mean,
Yeah.
Yes, you're correct. Like US were fine with China making toys, making shoes, making even iPhones for United States. They're just leveraging the Chinese cheap labor force,
right,
to produce for America at a lower price. But in this process of globalization, the benefit is not distributed evenly. Right. When the iPhone is produced in China, China actually doesn't get too much of the iPhone profit. Most of the iPhone profit goes to Apple. Right. But Apple, the profit is not distributed to the rest of the Americans. It's distributed to the top Apple executives and the shareholders.
Right.
So, the 1%, 1% gets benefit from the globalization. And with a lot of Americans are getting left behind because the American manufacturing base is getting hollowed out. And people start noticing after a couple, 4 decades of this. U.S. started offshoring even before China opened up. This started back in the 70s. And after 40 years of hollowing out U.S. manufacturing base, now vast majority of Americans are not elite educated from Ivy League. They didn't have all these connections, old boys network to help or have their daddy's connection to put them into investment funds, etc. So many Americans are left behind, and this is a real problem.
Yeah.
And this is where politicians also try to play the blame game. It's like, don't blame us and our Wall Street sponsors who actually
blame
put
China
yourself in this misery.
And it's like, how do you blame China for policy and policy that was made by lawmakers, and lawmakers being paid by companies to do that policy? They turn around and blame China for this. Oh, it's China's fault. How is it China's fault when it was your political leaders that made this particular policy, working with all of these corporations that were going to be advantaged by it? It's just outrageous. But that's the way they think. That's what they're trying to put the blame on. I'm curious on something else.
And
Joe Biden. Oh, go for it, please.
Yeah, sorry. On top of that, there's also Pentagon that's always had a hard boner for containing China. I mean, Pentagon was held in check for the longest time by the U.S. American business lobby, who want engagement because they want to continue to reap profit from China. And what happens in more recent years, there's kind of fracturing of the American business interests. If you look at the S&P 500, the most of the stock capitalization is going to all the big tech companies, right? Yeah. We're talking about Google, Apple, Facebook, etc. Well, among these, Google is not in China. Facebook is not in China. They have nothing to gain from China. On the other hand, Google, Google, Facebook, they're also very closely tied with American. They're part of the American military industrial intelligence complex. They're basically embedded with all the intelligence services. That Google have a lot of contract from the Pentagon, etc. So they have everything to gain from blocking out their Chinese competitors like TikTok. TikTok is eating their lunch in social media. So, one of the campaign to kill TikTok in the United States actually majorly funded by Google and Facebook.
Yes.
Because this is competition. Because China now has grown powerful enough. They're no longer just a proxy labor force for U.S. multinationals. Right. They're having their own major brands like Huawei, like TikTok, that's able to compete internationally. This is why U.S. now coming down, to very hard on Huawei. They put the chip ban. The whole chip ban on China is to kill Huawei and to kill Huawei's phone business in particular. So there's a business competition because a lot and also EVs. Previously, American companies are making a lot of money in China. Like my cousin, his first car in China was Buick. Buick was big brand in China, and GM was making more money in China than they make in United States because China is the world's largest car market right now.
Right.
But in just the last few years, China had experienced the electric transition, the EV transition. Now more than 50% of the new cars sold in China are electric vehicles. And all the American car makers, European car makers, Japanese car makers, they all got caught flat-footed. And this is why Biden is slapped and later Trump. That's why they're trying to slap on 300% tariffs on Chinese EVs, because they know they will not be able to compete. BYD is making their entry-level electric cars for $13,000 US. I mean, how can you compete with that?
Yeah, how do you compete with that, right? And I guess the answer is you can't. If it was just a straight market, you couldn't compete with it, and that's their issue. That's why the walls are now going up. That's why they're trying to break the world into multiple fronts. I don't think that's going to work, though. I mean, the reality of it is China has been able to create these relationships. China, Russia, and all of these countries that are trying to get into BRICS and trying to get into this idea of we're going to use our own local currencies. Their argument is better. And, in the old days, in the Soviet days, it is an easy argument to make that we're freedom and justice, we're love and light. The Soviet Union is a repressive government. So obviously you want to be more with the love and light government. Okay, fast forward, and you get this argument of, well, we're going to deal with each other as equals. We're going to be nations using our own currencies in regards to trade. We don't believe in sanctioning one another. And we believe in a collective world that is relatively peaceful. And then you get the other argument of we're the hegemon and all of you are vassals. And because we're the hegemon, we should have a world with a hegemon. Okay, well, that argument doesn't work. It just doesn't. That is not a satisfying argument to go to somebody and explain to them why you are better than they are and why they should want a world where one country is better and a hegemon. Like, it is a bizarre argument to make, but that is the argument that we're putting forward. And I suspect that's the reason why much of the world has lumped in on this idea of we prefer to be equals. We don't like these sanctions. We want to deal with each other in our own trade in a way that is not disadvantageous to us. No, that makes sense. That's an argument that works. And I suspect the new world is going to be based on that argument. In the recent summit, by the way. No, go for it, please.
Oh, go ahead. I think you're getting into it. I was just going to bring up the Xi-Biden summit because
that's right. I wanted to go to the meeting.
Xi Jinping address. I'll let you do the intro. Sorry.
No, well, I was just going to go into it where Joe Biden and Xi Jinping meet on the sidelines, and in this conversation, Joe Biden brings up, I guess, the relationship between China and Russia, which again, that conversation is not going to go anywhere. They even bring up nukes, basically saying we need to have human beings use nukes as opposed to having some kind of automated system. Okay, again, that seemed like a gimme, though. Like meaning this meeting didn't seem to accomplish anything of significance. But give me a take on this.
I was not even aware there's a discussion of having AI to control nukes. I mean, that's pretty scary stuff. The fact that they're having this discussion is like, what? Were you actually thinking about having AI? I mean, you are really thinking about like recreating Skynet, like the Terminator world. I mean, what are you even thinking? But that's what I was thinking. Anyway.
Yeah, it was bizarre. I read that. I was like, wait a minute. where did this come from? I mean, you got the situation where right now the U.S. is allowing strikes into Russia. Russia changing its nuclear doctrine to effectively say, look, if you hit us, and depending upon how you do this, we have lowered our nuclear threshold to allow nukes to be used in a situation where our integrity is threatened. And you get a conversation on the sideline where Joe Biden is weirdly talking about automation or automated nuclear response. It's just bizarre. It's just very strange. What was accomplished at this APEC summit, by the way, if anything?
I don't know what US has accomplished except to provide us with more comedic moments with Joe Biden.
Yeah.
But Xi Jinping was pretty explicit and blunt during his meeting with Biden, and this is why I'm really surprised by the blunt language, and I'm really surprised by how little this is covered in mainstream U.S. media, because this is what Xi Jinping has said. In summary, this is a readout from the Chinese official site, and it says these are the points, the four big main points. One, there must be correct strategic understanding. The Thucydides Trap is not a historical destiny. A new Cold War cannot and should not be fought. Containment of China is unwise, undesirable, and will not succeed. Two, words must be trustworthy and action must be fruitful. A person cannot stand without credibility. China always follows through on its words. But if the U.S. side always say one thing and does another, it's a very detrimental to America's image and damage mutual trust. Xi Jinping is basically saying, America, you are speaking with forked tongues for a long time now. And number three, treat each other as equals. In exchange between two major countries like China and United States, neither side can reshape the other according to their own wishes, nor can they suppress the other based on the so-called position of strength, let alone deprive other of legitimate development rights to maintain their own leading position. Now, Xi Jinping is talking about U.S. chip sanctions to hold down China's progress. Number four, red lines and bottom lines cannot be challenged. As two major countries, China and United States, inevitably have some contradictions and differences, but they cannot harm each other's core interests, let alone engage in conflict and confrontation. The One China principle and the three China-U.S. joint communiques are the political foundation of bilateral relations and must be strictly observed. Taiwan issue, democracy and human rights, development path, development rights are China's four red lines, which cannot be challenged. And this is, by the way, these are bolted in the original Chinese readout. So these are the real important guardrails, most important guardrails and safety nets for the China-U.S. relations. Number five, there should be more dialogue and cooperation. Under current circumstances, the common interests between China and the United States have not decreased but increased, whether in areas of economy and trade, agriculture, drug control, law enforcement, public health, or facing global challenges such as climate change and artificial intelligence, as well as international hotspot issue. China-U.S. cooperation is needed. Both sides should extend the list of cooperation, make cooperation cake bigger, and achieve win-win cooperation. Sorry, I thought 4 points, but there's actually more. 6, respond to people's expectations. The development of China-U.S. relations should always focus on well-being of both people and gathering the strength of both people. Both sides should build bridges for personnel exchange, cultural communication, and remove interference and obstacle, not artificially creating chilling effect. Again, Xi Jinping is casting shade on the U.S. for obstructing the natural people-to-people exchange between China and the United States. Number 7, demonstrate great power responsibility. China and the United States should always consider the future and destiny of humanity, take responsibility for world peace, and provide public goods for the world. Or I think that's not that's a lot. That's not what we do.
Yeah, that's not what we do. That is not the way we think. We don't take responsibility for world peace. We do not do that. I mean, I can't look over American history and think for any moment that we take responsibility for any notion of world peace. I mean, for God's sake, you're talking about Iraq, you're talking about kill squads in South America, you're talking about trying to overthrow the Syrian government, the Ukrainian war. Like that is not the way we think. We look at this stuff from what is in America's best interest. And it's not even really America's best interest. What is in a certain elite group in America's best interest? That is not the way we function. And this notion of win-win relationships, again, look, the fundamental crux of the issue that America always has is that we don't consider other countries as equals. We don't have equals. We have enemies and we have vassals. And so Europe are vassals. They can't even fire missiles without the US assisting in the programming of those missiles in the UK. Like, put that in context, right? And so it's like, we don't have equal nations that we engage with. If a nation is equal to us, that nation is most likely an enemy to us. And then the catch becomes, okay, well, do we at least regard them as equals in the context of enemies? We did the Soviet Union. China and Russia are creating a world where the US will be forced to engage it as an equal. And I think what China's point is, look, when you talk to us, if you're not going to talk to us as equals, we're not going to have anything to talk about. Is the US getting that message? I don't know. And I guess part of the conversation with you is when Trump comes in, Trump seems to be taking a pressure strategy towards Iran, which by definition is going to be a pressure strategy also against China. He seems to have less of a hard-on towards Russia and more of a hard-on towards China. And it seems that he's going to change the focus of America, potentially. I mean, who knows, right? It's Trump. So Trump may get us even more involved in Ukraine because he's coming up with this kind of hubristic points of view. But from your take, I mean, Xi Jinping is right on this issue. At least I think he's right on this issue. I don't know if China, there's a question in America about whether or not China is going to be a hegemon, whether it wants to or not. Meaning, regardless of China saying we believe in win-win relationships, at the end of the day, if they become sufficiently big enough, I mean, for God's sake, there's 1.3 billion people. They are 3 or 4 times our size. If they are able to turn that into industrial might, which they have on some level, what does that look like in 20 years? If China becomes a hegemon, what does the world look like as China's a hegemon? That is something that freaks the US out to no end. And a lot of what the US is doing, either in Taiwan or even, I would argue, in Ukraine on some level, has to do with this notion of we need to undercut China's ability to grow and China's ability to be whatever China ultimately wants to be. From your point of view, is that even possible at this point? What are you expecting for Trump coming in office? I'm just curious. And what is China expecting of Trump coming into office?
Well, Jamar, we have seen this before. We've seen Trump presidency 1.0. He came into presidency last time promising to reset U.S.-Russia relations. I mean, he always wanted to repair U.S.-Russia relations. And he wanted to fight the deep state. Well, guess what? Trump lost. Trump lost the fight with the deep state. He came to office promising no foreign wars, no foreign intervention. Yet he was pressured into bomb Syria, and that's I still remember when Trump authorized cruise missile strike on Syria. CNN anchor was welling up and saying, "This is the most presidential moment for Trump." I mean,
Brian Williams. I distinctly remember
Brian
that.
Williams.
The light of our missiles light the sky, or something like that. He went into portrait as he watched missiles fired from the U.S. kill Syrians. It was the weirdest thing in the world.
And this Trump lost that battle. In the end, he was forced to expel Russian diplomat, send more weapons to Ukraine, and the relationship worsened. And this is what we're seeing right now. Biden is setting up Trump to fail by authorizing deeper missile strike into Russia. I mean, like Trump, and Biden is a lame duck president. I mean, right now, all he can do is further just cause further havoc and damage. We already know he sabotaged the DNC by after DNC dethroned him, forcing him not to run. We know he sabotaged DNC by anointing Kamala Harris as his successor 30 minutes after he was forced out by Pelosi and Obama. That was like Biden's FU moment to the DNC. He knows Kamala Harris is a terrible candidate, and the only reason he had her as running mate as VP before is because he know Kamala is no threat to him. Because Kamala in the other primary, she was polling less than Andrew Yang. I mean, who even remember Andrew Yang? And Kamala was polling less than that. So that was the dark Brandon moment for Biden. And I think he's doing another dark Brandon moment right now by, okay, you know what? I'm going to escalate in Ukraine. And now it's your mess. It's Trump's mess. Like mess for Trump to clean up. I'm signing out, folks. I'm gonna go lick some ice cream. And this is Trump is set up to fail, basically.
Yeah.
And this is and I don't think
he's trying to do with Trump too, because Ukraine has lost this war, and it's like you lost an election where this was litigated, meaning the American public knew that this was on the ballot, and you lost on this issue. And yet he's doing this nonsense. He's going to escalate either way. I mean, it's just astonishing. I look, man, this is very dangerous time period between the transition. The first time around, though, I would say that Trump got caught into this whole Trump and Russia stuff that limited his capability of doing anything in Russia. Like, meaning there was no way for him to bring down hostilities because he was in the middle of a lawsuit where they claimed that he won the race by working with the Russians. And so anything that he did was trying to say, no, really, I don't like the Russians. Look at me, I'm passing sanctions. Look at me, I'm firing missiles into Syria. Like, it was bizarre. I don't get the sense, though, that he is going to accept that framing in the way that they did last time. I get the sense that he is very militant this time around in regards to what he wants to accomplish, whatever that is. So,
yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, one of those things is Iran and China. He seems to have a hard on for China.
Yes, he does. And and by the way, when it comes to the Middle East, there's actually not many daylight between Democrats and Republicans. Either side would be Israel first. Both sides are Israel first parties. Let's face it. And now Iran is the one that's always in Netanyahu's crosshair. Netanyahu has said before he wanted to take out Iraq, he wants to take out Syria, he wants to take out Iran. He considers these three countries existential threat to existence of Israel. And
he considers them part of Israel. He considers them Israel.
Yes. People in the United States, many of them don't know. From river to the sea was originally Likud Party's slogan. They want from the river of Nile to the other river, to the river of Euphrates. They claim this whole greater Israel, and that includes Iraq, Syria. Of course, they have to go to war with all of them. And then
they want all of it.
U.S. is full on board because people sometimes say, Israel is a tail wagging the dog. But really, Israel and United States are the same dog. It's the same animal. This is why Netanyahu gets standing ovation in the Congress during a genocide. And so Trump is going to go hard on Iran. But you know what? Iran is not Iraq. Iran is much bigger, much more populous. And Iran has powerful friends. People forget during the first Gulf War, the first Persian Gulf War in 1990, early 1990s against Saddam. United States put together George Bush Sr. put together international coalition that included Syria. Syria actually sending a tank battalion to join the United States to throw Saddam out of Kuwait. So, but back then, Saddam had no friends. Soviet Union just collapsed. He had no international sponsor because his sponsor was actually United States. United States just backstabbed him and said, we have no problem with you invading Kuwait. But after he did that, it's like, oh no, we're gonna lay smackdown on you right now. And so, Iran has powerful friends in Russia and China. China imports a lot of hydrocarbons from Iran.
That's like
And
90%, if I'm
thing
not
is,
mistaken. Correct me if I'm wrong. It's like
and
90% of the oil exports for Iran go to China.
well, from maybe from on Iran side, because China also imports from the Gulf countries
Right,
and
that's
also
what I mean.
Africa.
Like the amount of
But
oil that
but
going from Iran, 90% of the oil from Iran that it exports goes
yes,
to China.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, because Iran is under sanction by U.S. and its allies. So like
Mhm.
people like South Korea, they would have to get U.S. permission if they even want to import Iranian oil and gas. Whereas
That's
China's like,
mind-blowing.
well,
That's mind-blowing.
we're just gonna buy, we're gonna buy,
Just think about
and
that.
the
You're a
thing is,
sovereign nation, and you have to get permission from another country to import something that is in your country's best interest. That is mind-blowing.
I mean, South Korea is a military occupied country. I mean, U.S. stationed the 50,000 troops there, and then you have, but also Iran is not isolated by any mean. It's connected through Russia through Caspian Sea,
Right.
and there's nothing U.S. can do to cut off that supply unless they have some magical weapon that can zap U.S. Navy into Caspian Sea, which is essentially a lake, enclosed lake. So there's no way U.S. can cut off the link between Iran and Russia. And similarly, China is linked to Iran through the Iron Silk Road. There's already rail links from China to Iran through Central Asia. So
Right.
there's Russia and China will support Iran. I mean, they will not let Iran fail because they also understand the reason why U.S. going after Iran, because Iran is kind of the underbelly of Eurasia of
Mhm.
this of the BRICS, and so Iran will not be allowed to fail, and Iran will be a much harder nut to crack. I mean, if
Agreed.
U.S. really goes in, I don't know. I really don't know if Pentagon is serious about having a war with Iran because
I don't know. I don't get the sense. I mean, I'll tell you this. If Trump is right, and I want to stop wars, not start them. That doesn't stop him, though, from have this mindset that I'm going to pressure Iran. Meaning, even if he's not necessarily talking about a war, he may be talking about some kind of either trade war or some kind of pressure campaign. But I don't know how that works. I mean, the first time around, I always said Joe Biden is the worst president we've ever had. The first time around, Iran was isolated, North Korea was isolated. Both were kind of in their own spheres. And then after the Ukrainian war, Iran was brought out the cold. North Korea was brought out the cold. And not just brought out the cold, Iran started to ingratiate itself closer to China, Russia, etc. The countries in the region. You have Saudi Arabia now that has a tacit relationship with Iran and at each other's throats, all of which are under the umbrella of BRICS, either as a member or as a close associate member. Meaning Trump is coming into a situation that is radically different than the situation he left, where he could work with the Arab states to try to go after Iran. That is not the way it looks currently. And because that's not the way it looks, all of this bellicosity coming out of Trump, I don't know what it means in a real world scenario.
Well, you remember it was Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, that came up with a Abraham Accord, to bring to bring the Gulf countries and eventually Saudi Arabia to recognize state of Israel. So like not then to isolate Iran in particular, to form like an anti-Iran alliance between Israel and the Gulf Arab states all against Iran. But then China brokered the Iran-Saudi peace deal.
Right.
And then October 7th happened. And there's no way they're going to have further expansion of Abraham Accords. There's no way at this point Saudi Arabia is going to say, "Oh, I'm going to recognize Israel right now because Trump told me to." Because that would be political suicide. People will be upping arms. So that the Abraham Accord is dead. There's no Abraham Accords 2.0. It's not going to happen. And Iran is already patching up their tie with Saudi Arabia. So U.S. might still try to wedge the Sunni-Shiite divide like they always do. But I don't know how much success they're going to have when they're still currently supporting Israel atrocity in Gaza and Lebanon. And that's broadcast all over the internet to the whole world, to the whole Arab world and the Muslim world. And under such circumstances, no Arab government would be seen to be have offer friendly overture to Israel and to even align more closely with United States. I mean, that's just not politically feasible.
That's a non-starter.
So right now, I do agree with you that U.S. will probably adopt a hybrid war, economic warfare, more sanctions. But Iran has seen that all before. Iran has been under sanction by United States for decades now.
Yeah.
They've been on the enemy list since 1979, since Iran overthrew U.S.-backed Shah. So this is nothing new for Iran, and they are already joining new internet. So the BRICS, in a way, is kind of a replacement for all this international institution United States was destroying. Before Iran and North Korea was left out. That's why they're what U.S. called them pariah states or rogue states. But now China and Russia are putting together a new international forum, a new international institution that includes everybody. So I think, at least rhetorically, Trump will probably be hard on Iran. I would have to wait and see, how that translates into concrete action. I think what we're going to see is more increasing propaganda against Iran. Remember, there was an episode where there was an Iranian woman who had a mental episode. She came out undressed, and then there's all these social media campaign. Yeah, social media campaign and saying how this is a protest against the mullahs and stuff. And her husband was asking us, people, please take down those videos, be respectful. This is not a protest. She's just have a mental issue. But all these, NED sponsor activists, that they're posting her videos and making her an icon of resistance. Again, I think there's going to be more of that. Probably. That's more likely.
Let me ask you this. I guess this could be the last question. Are you concerned of any kind of flashpoint in Donald Trump's pressure campaign? Are you concerned that this turns from economic into military in any particular way, whether it's in his South China Sea, whether it's on the issues of Taiwan, or do you think, for the most part, no, this is just a continued economic trade war of sorts, this kind of economic escalation of breaking the world into two halves, this kind of Eastern sphere and this kind of Western sphere? What do you think this looks like under the Trump administration for the next, 4 years, give or take?
When Xi Jinping was speaking to Biden in Peru, he was not really speaking to Biden, who we all know is a walking zombie. He's really signaling to Trump, the incoming president. These are the China's red line. Do not cross them, and that's why he's very blunt, very direct, and this is why I don't think there's a big chance of Taiwan blowing up because China has been always very straightforward on the red line on Taiwan. No official declaration of formal independence from Taiwan. That will trigger a war. United States knows this, and government on Taiwan will not do anything without explicit approval and encouragement from the United States. So as long as U.S. has no interest in triggering a World War III, which will for sure happen if they support Taiwan independence, then status quo will likely continue, with U.S. continuing to sell weapons. Maybe they will offer rhetorical support for the Taiwan leaders, etc. You will increase they will maintain the tension. The tension is important for U.S. to continue to sell weapons and justify their military presence in East Asia. But I don't think the U.S. Pentagon is ready to touch off a war by open supporting, pushing for Taiwan independence. So that arena is I'm not too concerned about. John Mearsheimer thinks South China Sea is a potential flashpoint. Again, I don't think so, because right now South China Sea we're talking about fishery dispute. Okay, we're talking about dispute over an exclusive economic zone, different maritime claims, and so far we have seen how it plays out. Is U.S. is supporting Philippines to push China into a confrontation, and then we see the water gun fights between Chinese Coast Guard and the Filipino Navy supply ships, right? So what's U.S. gonna do? I mean, is U.S. gonna bring the guns to a water fight? I mean, like that's so this is why they're having some ridiculous suggestions saying, oh, U.S. Coast Guard also have a role to play in South China Sea. I mean, are they going to sell the U.S. Coast Guard to the South China Sea to do water cannon fight with the Chinese water guard? I mean, even if they do that, they're still going to lose because the Chinese Coast Guard has much bigger ships and bigger water cannons. It would just
not to mention it is in their backyard as opposed to the U.S. Coast Guard. What 4,000 miles?
Jamar, can you imagine the kind of humiliation if United States Coast Guard is to lose a water cannon fight in South China Sea? I mean, that would be the ultimate humiliation. So I don't think that will happen. And then so these are two biggest issues that could touch off a war. But I think the chances are small. But I think U.S. will keep on pushing in order to create tensions. They will keep on. We already saw this with the Philippines because China in July they sat down with the Filipino government, said, okay, let's agree to return to our previous gentleman's agreement in 2014, where we allowed the Philippine Navy supply ship to continue to supply the half dozen Marines that were stranded on that ship, and then but you have to promise not to bring building materials to fortify your position. And right after that agreement, like Philippines had one successful supply mission without Chinese Coast Guard interfere. But right after that, U.S. suddenly went to Philippines, offered $500 million in military aid, and then Marcos suddenly reversed 180 degrees and said, oh, like China misinterpreted our agreement, and then it was back on again. So U.S. will continue to do this kind of hybrid war. I would call it hybrid war. Manufacturing of tensions, which justify U.S. stationed missiles in the Philippines, selling missiles to Taiwan, stationing that system in South Korea. Those will continue. U.S. will probably gain more rights to Filipino military bases, etc. But at the same time, Chinese economy is such that all the gravitational pull of Chinese economy is pulling all the ASEAN economy toward China right now. I mean, most of the countries outside the Philippines, they don't want conflict. They want trade with China. I live in Indonesia. Like the lights and the internet are powered by the Chinese power plants north of Bali, and it's powered by Huawei built 4G network. So like here, in all the countries in Southeast Asia outside the Philippines, China is the largest foreign direct investment source of foreign investment. So they don't want to have a conflict with China, and I think U.S. will play these silly games, but it ultimately won't amount to much. This is my prediction.
No, look, from your mouth to God's ears. I don't even like these silly games, but the last thing I want is it to break off into some kind of larger war. Carl, man, always appreciate your take on this stuff. And thank you for the rundown, especially the conversation on the sidelines between Biden and Xi Jinping, because you're right. The U.S. is not going to read the readout for China per se. Instead, they were talking about AI controlling nukes. And I was like, what? I was like, where did this conversation, like in the context of the world that we're in, where the hell did this conversation bubble up where this becomes the thing that they report on, as opposed to what you were pointing out, which was effectively that Xi Jinping read Joe Biden Riot Act. And it wasn't a riot act just for America. I mean, for Biden, it was for America as a whole, even for Donald Trump coming in. These are our red lines. Respect them or else. Carl Jacques, a host of Silk and Steel podcast focused on China and surrounding regions and their history, culture, and politics. You can follow Carl on Twitter at Carl Jacques. Follow his podcast on Twitter at Steel Silk In, and subscribe and support their podcast on patreon.com, Silk and Steel. Man, Carl, always appreciate you, man. Thank you for this. All right. Let's take a quick break. We are going to come back with, let me fix this real quick. There we are. Let's take a quick break. We're going to come back. We have Sabrina Salvatini. Wait a minute, is it Salvati? I always call it Sabby Sabs, but it's not Salvati. Yeah, I was right the first time. Sabrina is supposed to come on at 8:15. She is a great friend of the show. She used to come on Fault Lines, and she said kind of things about the show, which is always a positive in my eyes. So she is supposed to be on at 8:15. That will be coming up shortly. I'm going to check to make sure she's still joining. But look, if you guys dig the content, give it a like, share it, hit the subscribe button. I am here Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. and doing news, politics, culture, internationally and domestic. So if you dig it, subscribe to it. If you really dig it, you can support the content through PayPal, Patreon, or for that matter, super chats, stickers, whatever you prefer to call them. All stickers will be read, providing they're not racist, sexist, or for that matter, bigoted. Back in a moment. Oh, by the way, so as I've told you guys, I have been back and forth with Glenn Deason trying to get him to join me on the show. There were difficulties making that work. There were scheduling difficulties that Glenn was running into. However, I sent him interview questions that basically I can pose to him through video. He agreed to do that. He sent his responses. And so I'm going to upload that, I guess you could say, tele-interview with Glenn Deason. It should be a good one. And I appreciate Glenn for doing it. Shout out to him for taking the time to sit down and answer all of my questions and all of my pestering to get him to join me. So I'll be back in a moment. Welcome back to the Jamal Thomas Morning Show. My name is Jamal Thomas. This is indeed my show. I run from 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. Monday through Friday. If you dig this content, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and of course, hit the notification. I show up at all times of the day and night because I tend to be an insomniac. And when real men can't sleep, real men do the news. Hence, me here doing the news. I want to appreciate and I want to thank all of you for joining me. I appreciate each and every one of you for joining this program. And my guest is here. Excellent. Excellent. There she is, the woman of the hour. We are joined with Sabrina Savati. She is a Boston-based activist, leftist, and podcaster. She's a member of the Revolutionary Black Network, a Black-led multicultural network and co-op of everyday people, activists, and allies focused on empowering communities through education, organization, and direct action. Sabrina, welcome to the show. How you doing this morning? You doing all right?
I'm doing great. How are you, Jamal?
I am doing great. Better that you are with me. And thank you for joining me. I really appreciate this. Let's start off at the very beginning. Why did Kamala Harris lose this race? How does a person spend $1 billion running against somebody that they call fascist, they call Hitler, they call racist, they call him a sexual abuser? They said he tried to overthrow the government of the US. That one I actually agree on. And they called him a felon. And they lost. Not just lost. She lost the popular vote. The first time a Democrat has lost the popular vote, or a Republican has won the popular vote, going back to 2004. He's increased his numbers in 49 out of 50 states. And from the standpoint of Republicans in Congress, they are going to have the highest, let's say, vote percentage than they've had going back for like 40, 50 years. How does a person spend $1 billion and lose that badly? What happened?
Yeah, I think a number of people were surprised, but I was not surprised. I predicted that Trump would win 312 electoral votes, that he would get every swing state. And that was just based off the data and the research from previous elections. I think the media did a really good job of convincing people that this race was really close. And I didn't believe that it was close. Just because interviewing people on the ground about how they were going to vote, a number of people told me that they were going to stay home this time around, including those that voted in 2020, were not willing to come out this time around. So the pulse that I heard from people on the ground was not what corporate media was displaying. So there's a number of reasons. I did a video discussing 10 reasons. I may not remember all of them, but here are a couple. Number one, the economy. Kamala Harris didn't have a strong economic platform the way that Bernie Sanders did. She wasn't running on $15 minimum wage, or it should be higher than that, but she wasn't even running on that. She wasn't running on canceling all student loan debt. She wasn't running on free public universities. Like, she didn't have that blueprint that Bernie Sanders had that actually energized and excited a large number of young voters to come out and vote. So that is really important. I don't believe that the majority of people didn't vote for her because of her race or because of her gender. Do I believe that some people voted that way? Absolutely. But I don't think that was the majority. That was not what I heard from people on the ground and a number of panels that I hosted prior to the election. So the economy was a big one, and she's a part of the current administration. So everything that people were blaming Biden for, they were going to blame her too, unless she was able to separate herself from Joe Biden, which she could not do for whatever reason. I think the nail in the coffin with her was the interview on The View when Sonny Hostin asked her, what would she do differently than Joe Biden? And she said she wouldn't do anything differently. That was a terrible answer for Kamala Harris. So the economy, she couldn't separate herself from Joe Biden. The celebrification of her campaign, I think, actually hurt her. When you're trying to reach working class people do not identify with celebrities on an economic level. And right now, a lot of people are struggling economically. The grocery prices are expensive. That's the main complaint I've heard from people over and over again this past year. So you're bringing people on the stage that we can't really, like, these people are rich. And then word got out that a number of these celebrities were paid to appear at these rallies. That's
paid. You're talking about like $20 million? Like, they paid Whoopi Goldberg, about $2 million to Harpo Productions. I think there was like $20 million in musical performances by Beyonce and all of these other people. The check to Alanis Morissette apparently bounced. So Alanis Morissette didn't show up. And then you get people like Joanne Reed that said it was a perfect and flawless campaign. And not just flawless. She brings in even Queen Latifah endorse, and Queen Latifah doesn't endorse anybody. And it's like,
yeah, no.
All this so out of touch that you believe that because she has musical acts that she paid for, by the way, that somehow is indicative of political success. It's bizarre.
Because they're not a part of our class. A lot of those commentators on corporate media are millionaires. They're not like, they have like penthouse apartments in New York City. They're not taking the subway. You know, they have a driver, they have a car that drops them off at the studio in the morning. Like they're not a part of our class. So to them, it may have looked like a flawless campaign. But first of all, there's no such thing as a flawless campaign. Even Bernie Sanders' campaign had some flaws here and there. So I couldn't believe she said that. But the celebrity hype, it gave people the impression that, okay, she's trying to buy our vote. This is what I heard from people on the ground. She's trying to buy our vote with all these different celebrities. So there's that one too. She also ran away from her base. This whole idea of adding Liz Cheney to her campaign, promoting or, you know, being enthusiastic about getting an endorsement from Dick Cheney, that's running away from your base. So she ran further to the right and ran away from any type of progressive or socialist that have supported people like Bernie Sanders. She ran away from those people and ran to the right. That was a bad idea. The other thing I think that really hurt Kamala Harris, of course, is Gaza. And as much as they want you to believe that Gaza did not impact this election, that's totally false. Jill Stein won the Muslim vote, according to the CARE exit poll. So Kamala Harris lost the Muslim vote that Joe Biden won in 2020. She lost the youth vote. A lot of younger people, when they were interviewed, the reason why they didn't come out and support Kamala Harris was because of Gaza. So it did impact this election. So foreign policy actually did have something to do with turnout this time around compared to previous elections that I have been able to vote in. So
just to interrupt real quick, Trump came in number 2 on the Gaza vote.
Right.
And if you remember, one of Trump's pitches was, how is he bringing Liz Cheney? Dick Cheney was responsible for killing millions of Muslims and Arabs in these regime change wars, either in Iraq or in some of these other countries, or Afghanistan for that matter. And you're bringing his daughter, who fully agrees with that policy, in order to back you up. And he's right. He's absolutely right. But whereas Donald Trump is running around saying, I'm going to end the war, Harris, Bill Clinton, Joe Biden, all of these people were effectively trying to make justifications for why you should vote for a party that is backing a genocide. It's just outrageous. Like in the youth vote, who was on those campuses getting beaten by cops in order to make the point of saying genocide is wrong. How is this political party backing this? And how are you asking us to vote for it? Well, what? She lost like 8 million votes from when Joe Biden won to her race. I think she got like 73 million votes. Joe Biden got 81 million votes. If Donald Trump would have gotten the exact same vote tally this time around, which was 1 million votes, by the way, more than what he got back the last time he ran in the race, he still would have lost. So you're 1,000% correct. 1,000% right. I can't disagree with you more. I want to actually, do you believe, my belief is that the Democratic Party, hates the left. I think it's that. But they feel like they're stuck with the left because of their political disposition. And whereas the left says we want healthcare, education, and it's not even the left, the overwhelming majority of the American public. When you ask the public, hey, what do you want? If a candidate went to the mat for you on these issues, would you back that candidate? Healthcare, education, expansion of Social Security, free college, etc. Their answer is yes. The Democratic Party don't believe that, though, or at the very least, there's a contradiction between how they need to fund their campaigns versus what they advocate for. And so they need to go to rich people. Kamala Harris got over $1 billion in this race and convince rich people, hey, could you give me money so I can, increase taxes on the top upper class so we can get healthcare, education, etc. They're going to say, well, we don't need those things. We're already rich. I can pay for healthcare, education. I don't need those things. I think the Democratic Party, from their point of view, it is a pain in their ass to have to run on those policies because they need to get the left to back them. I think Schumer is exactly what Kamala Harris did.
And it's already won
Right
a
here.
large percentage of those people over. On the other hand, Trump is so new that for every, this is the second point, for every blue-collar Democrat we will lose in Western PA, we will pick up 2, 3 moderate Republicans in the suburbs of Philadelphia. And you can repeat that in Ohio and Illinois and Wisconsin. The voters who are most out there figuring out what to do are not the blue-collar Democrats.
Correct me if I'm wrong. That is exactly what she did. That is exactly the entire point of Liz Cheney. This belief that they are these unicorn Republicans that are so disgruntled and hate Trump so much that they would jump onto the Democratic Party. So we can lose lefties. We can lose progressives. We can marginalize the progressive vote because they have nowhere else to go and they're going to vote for us either way. And we can increase our numbers through this triangulation thing that Bill Clinton came up with by going for moderate Republicans. Is that not what they did? And it failed miserably.
That's exactly what they did. They tried to go for the Nikki Haley voters. They tried to go for the people that voted for Nikki Haley in the GOP primary, but they weren't paying attention to the data. The data showed that during the GOP primary that a number of the people that voted for Nikki Haley were independent voters, not Republican voters. So Donald Trump overwhelmingly won the Republican vote. People tend to vote for their party. And this was a terrible miscalculation by the Democratic Party. This idea that all these Republicans who were against Donald Trump were going to support Kamala Harris, even the Republicans, for the most part, that were against Donald Trump, most likely were going to support their party. So that was a terrible idea. I don't know who came up with that idea, which advisor or consultant thought that it would be great to add Liz Cheney. It actually would have been better for Kamala Harris to add someone to her campaign that was further left, someone that was a part of that Bernie coalition. But you're right. They hate that part of the Democratic Party because it doesn't appeal to their donor class. So that's what this is really about, folks. It's not about what they can do for us. It's about what they can do for their donors. And the Democratic Party has moved further and further to the right over the years. Bernie Sanders, again, as much criticism as I have for him today, because he also has found ways to capitulate to the Democratic Party, to the establishment that he has criticized so much over the years. But he did create the blueprint for how to engage a mass number of people and to create huge turnout. You run on policies that are going to benefit working class people. And you would think that Kamala Harris, of all people, having ran for president in 2020, that she would have been aware of that. But she was never a strong candidate, and people really have to know she was a weak candidate, just like she was a weak candidate when she ran in 2020. So you would think this would be a lesson for the Democratic Party. Do I think they're going to change how they do things when it comes to Democrat leadership? No, Nancy Pelosi is running for re-election. She already announced that, so they'd rather appeal to Republicans than embrace the left or progressive wing of the party.
Well, that's what I was about to ask you. Where do you think they go? I don't have an answer for that question. And I've had on several guests. None of them really had an answer for that. And the reason why I asked that question, when Donald Trump lost, Donald Trump had a coalition. And that coalition, even when he lost, was willing to crawl over hot glass in order to vote for Donald Trump. Same thing with Sanders. When Sanders lost, his political coalition didn't go anywhere. They were still there. They looked at it as Sanders was cheated, which he was. And for the most part, that this is the direction that the Democratic Party should go if it's viable. And they remained. When Obama lost, when Obama won, I'm realizing how talented of a political force Obama was. Because truth is, it's not like they've deviated all that much from Obama. All things being equal, Obama was just able to keep the coalition together in a way that either Biden or Harris wasn't. Harris and Biden did not have anybody that loved them. They had people who hated Trump. And she ran that race trying to get the hate Trump coalition, believing it was large enough to win the election. Hillary Clinton did that back in 2016. It didn't work. And she tried to run effectively the same race as Clinton. It's bizarre to me. Now that they have failed at this task, where do they go? And I don't have an answer for that. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, right now they're considering Rahm Emanuel for the DNC chair. So they're just
It's outrageous.
They're all over the place. I think that the Democratic Party is going to have to do some deep soul searching. I don't think they are going to be willing to abandon the donor class. This party has moved away from the working class. And it's just a reality. And I believe, some say it started with Bill Clinton. I was too young to, know as much. But I do know that Barack Obama, I blame his presidency for giving us Donald Trump. People forget this, but Barack Obama ran a pretty, somewhat progressive campaign for that time. He was running on ending the wars, particularly in the Middle East. He was running on giving everybody health care. He didn't call it Medicare for all, but he was running on that. He was running on codifying Roe v. Wade. He said it's time for a change. Yes, we can. But of course, once he won the election, he governed like other politicians before him. So I say that it was Barack Obama's failure to fulfill those promises for the American people that actually gave us someone like Donald Trump. And I'm talking about the people who voted for voted for Obama in 2008 and maybe even 2012, but voted for Donald Trump in 2016. 30%. And we got to talk about those voters. Yeah. As much as people want to blame Kamala Harris's race for her not getting elected, this country elected Barack Obama twice.
Yep.
So it just, these are some of the things they want to point fingers at everybody else except for themselves. And even when we look back at the numbers for 2020, it's important to remember that even though Donald Trump lost, he still received over 74 million votes. So had it not been for the pandemic, I would have argued that Donald Trump would have won again. He lost because of the economic situation a lot of people were in during the pandemic. People lost their jobs. People lost businesses. If you were in one of the states that was under lockdown, like I am in Massachusetts, a lot of businesses closed here. So I would say the country economically was really upset and really fed up. And I think that's why Joe Biden was able to win. It wasn't that people loved Joe Biden. Right. They were really angry at Donald Trump because of the economic situation at that point in time. And usually when that happens, the incumbent loses the election.
Well, and a million people died and they blamed Trump for it. I mean, part of the, look, I agree with you. I think it was all of it. And if it wasn't for COVID, I agree with you. Trump probably would have won. Give me your take on the way that they've been dealing with this in media. And I want to show a specific clip. So Mika and Joe, the morning cast for Morning Joe. Mika is supposed to be a Democrat. Joe Scarborough is supposed to be a Republican, but he has fought vigorously for Joe Biden. And I would even say he's, Joe Biden whisperer. I listened to what they said after, and this is after weeks and weeks of going after Donald Trump, attacking voters, attacking lefties, saying that progressives are responsible, all of the stuff. Apparently, they had a conversation with Joe Biden, with that same Donald Trump, with that same Hitler. Listen to the way all of this has fundamentally changed all of a sudden after one conversation.
The opportunity to do, over the past week, Joe and I have heard from so many people, from political leaders to regular citizens, deeply dismayed by several of President-elect Trump's cabinet selections, and they are scared. Last Thursday, we expressed our own concerns on this broadcast and even said we would appreciate the opportunity to speak with the president-elect himself. On Friday, we were given the opportunity to do just that. Joe and I went to Mar-a-Lago to meet personally with President-elect Trump. It was the first time we have seen him in 7 years.
Now, we talked about a lot of issues, including abortion, mass deportation, threats of political retribution against political opponents, and media outlets. We talked about that a good bit. And it's going to come as no surprise to anybody who watches this show, has watched it over the past year or over the past decade, that we didn't see eye to eye on a lot of issues, and we told him so.
What we did agree on was to
So what is this? Access? Is that what that is? Like they spend all of this time bashing, attacking, going after Trump. And then it's like, well, we've had a meeting with the president and we still have profound disagreements. And there's going to be a but that comes into that conversation. We have decided to allow access to continue with this conversation moving forward. Is that what it is? They just want access? I mean, because they're being attacked for this by lefties, well, not by lefties, by other Democrats. Sunny, what is her name? Houston, the woman that's on The View, who believes that the only reason Trump won is because people are racist, sexist, and bigoted. She came out and attacked Morning Joe. I thought I had the clip up. She attacked Morning Joe for going and meeting with Donald Trump's team and coming back with that statement. Yeah, right here. So this is Sunny Houston, who, well, let me get your take on that first, because the ladies of The View is a whole different subject matter. They have been belligerent. Whoopi Goldberg is now on a sex strike. Her vagina is closed for operation for the next 4 years. And they have been on a tear recently. Give me your take on the Morning Joe thing, though. Is that just we want to keep access to Trump and his team, and so we are now less belligerent about the whole thing about Trump taking office, despite everything that we've said over the last year of this election? Give me your thoughts on that.
It sounds like they got a call from management, because the reality is post-election, MSNBC's ratings have decreased significantly. Significantly. They're struggling. And it's not just them, CNN as well, right? So
by the way, lefty news channels also, like those progressive news, like the Young Turks or David Pakman, Sam Smith, the world. Pakman came out and did this video where he's like, I've lost 10,000 subscribers. And I called all of my other lefty YouTubers and all of them lost 10,000 subscribers. I haven't lost any. I've gained over 1,000 this month. So
I didn't lose any either. That's what happens when you mislead people.
Yeah.
When you mislead the voters, like they allowed their audience to believe that, number one, this race was close, that Kamala had a chance to really win this thing. It would have been different if she won, let's say, a couple of the swing states, but to lose all of them, I think that sends a message to the viewers, to the base. So they have lost a number of ratings since the election. And so it sounds like to me, if I were to make an assumption, the producer of that show or of the network has had a talk with the host and said, listen, we got to get these ratings back up. If we want to get these ratings back up, you're going to have to tone down the rhetoric against Trump. And we're going to have to try to work with him in order to get viewers back, because the reality is you can't have your audience in an echo chamber. And I've tried to be very good about this on my own show, having people come on with different opinions, having diverse ideas. When you keep people in an echo chamber, you develop, it's only a matter of time before you are going to piss all of them off, because you're hyping people up to think that something can happen that you don't know for sure is going to happen. But you need to have a diverse audience. And MSNBC, the constant anti-Trump rhetoric over and over and over again. Mika, if I remember correctly, called Trump Hitler. So now it's okay for you to go sit down and talk with Hitler at Mar-a-Lago. So what does that make you? So what they're showing people is that, is Trump as bad as they said that he was, to the point that they're willing to go sit and have a conversation with him? I mean, they went all the way to Florida to sit down and talk to this guy. They could have talked to him over the phone. So I think that they're showing people this is the game. This is what I've been saying before. This is how the game is played. Are there serious concerns about Donald Trump? Absolutely. But would I go as far as to say that Donald Trump is Hitler? No. So it's they got a call from management, and management told them, we're going to have to tone down the rhetoric because we're losing viewers.
Yeah. Basically, get your mind right. This is not working all that much. I mean, that's the wild part, right? It's like the rhetoric had gotten so over the top. Donald Trump is Hitler. Donald Trump is a fascist. Donald Trump is going to shoot Liz Cheney in the face. That one bugged the hell out of me, by the way. And that one bugged me so much because look, for all of Trump ills, this notion of we're going to end the war. And Trump was having a speech or having a conversation with Tucker Carlson. And I have wanted him to lean into this notion of we need to stop these wars. And I wanted him to hit it directly, not this kind of oblique angle with Kamala Harris. Oh, he's hanging out with dictators. No, I wanted him to hit it directly. And that was the first time where he sat there in a long form conversation saying we need to end these wars. We're wasted $10 trillion in Afghanistan and Iraq. You know, why are we doing this? We don't get anything out of this, et cetera, et cetera. And they turned that conversation into Trump wants to shoot Liz Cheney in the face. And it's like, are you out of your minds? MSNBC, CNN ran with it, and not just ran with it. CNN was having interview after interview after interview where they would say, hey, Donald Trump said he wants to execute Liz Cheney. What do you have to say about that? And they would talk about it as if that is what happened. And I would point out that that's probably why they're losing ratings. Like if you're thinking of CNN basically being at the bottom of the barrel in regards to ratings, MSNBC losing viewership, it's the stuff like that where you told those people that she had a much better chance of winning. I'll give you another one. One of the reporters went to, I think it was like a DNC operative. And in having this conversation with the DNC operative, the operative effectively said this was $1 billion disaster. They told us that they were going to win. And not just told us they were going to win, we told our donors that if you give us money, we're going to win this race. And we have lost all legitimacy with people who are giving money to the Democratic Party because they believe on election night that they were going to win the race. That is mind-blowing. On election night, I sat here with a map and just went from state to state, putting in who I thought was going to win. It was obviously Trump. It was obviously Trump. Like, it wasn't even close. I mean, I ended up with Trump winning all of the swing states. I wasn't sure about Michigan, and I wasn't sure about Michigan because I wasn't sure if my own biases were jumping into play. Because I wanted him to lose Michigan. I wanted her to lose Michigan. I don't care if she won, if any state. I wanted her to lose Michigan to make a point. And she ends up losing Michigan. Give me your take on this level of, like, I've never seen them become so rabid and hyperbolic than on this race. I've never seen anything like it. I mean, you've been covering media for a while. What was your take while all of this was taking place?
It's because Kamala was such a weak candidate. I mean, they didn't go this hard. I feel like they didn't go this hard in 2020, but it's because Kamala was such a weak candidate. So they had to go extra hard at Donald Trump to convince Americans like, look, Kamala Harris may not be the best candidate in the world, but do you really want this guy again? Look at what this guy is doing, right? But if you're a strong candidate, you don't have to do that. If you're a strong candidate, your platform and your goals are going to speak for itself. You don't have to spend all of your time attacking Donald Trump and calling him Hitler and wants to shoot Liz Cheney and all this stuff. And also, the public has lost a lot of trust in corporate media. The numbers are showing that as well. And that I think it greatly, if I checked, it greatly increased this year, the public's distrust with the media. So there's that too. And this is why I encourage people to watch independent media, because if people would have been watching independent media, they would have known that it was always possible that Donald Trump was going to win. And I mean, independent media, not I'm independent, but I have sponsors and all that kind of stuff. I mean, like true independent media, you would have known there was always a possibility that Donald Trump could win again. I mean, even if you looked at the data was, for the most part, was mainly in his favor. Yes. And what drove me crazy is I would sit there and I would see corporate media pick apart or choose certain polls that would show that Kamala was ahead, and they would ignore all the other polls that were also left-leaning that showed Donald Trump was ahead. It's little things like that. They were manufacturing consent. They were trying to convince people that Kamala was really going to run away with this thing when the data was showing the opposite.
Yeah, 1,000% agree. I was shocked by it, to be frank. I didn't see what they were looking at. I legitimately didn't see what they were looking at. And a poll after poll, even when you're looking at, and then they would say, well, Kamala Harris didn't have a chance of winning the race. And I would point out, if you're looking at the polling, she was ahead in the very beginning, meaning when Kamala Harris first came out, and people thought, oh, great, something new is in the race. She popped up in the polls. And then she had those disastrous interviews, one after the next. And there was an interview with The View. There was also the interview with Stephen Colbert, where they said, how are you different than Joe Biden? And she said, I can't think of anything. She said, but I'm not Donald Trump and I'm not Joe Biden. And it's like, okay, well, but you got to tell us something. If indeed you're a new way forward, what is the new way that you are articulating to move forward? And in no situation could she articulate anything different, whether it was on Gaza, whether it was on the economy, any of those things. And at a certain point, the public looked at that and said, okay, well, you're not a new way forward. You're status quo. You're effectively continuity. And man, when you got 80, I think it was 70%, 75% of the country was either angry or dissatisfied with the direction of the country. And your answer to that is, I can't articulate a new way forward. Oh, that's a death nail. Like, there's no, like, how do you think she could have won this race? Like, meaning, say, for example, we do a replay. In hindsight, it's 2020, fair enough. But Kamala Harris takes over for Joe Biden. What would she have need to do in order to actually put on a decent campaign to actually win this thing and win this presidential election?
I'm going to be honest with you. I don't think she could have won. There's a number of things she could have done to increase her chances. Number one, calling for a permanent ceasefire and supporting an arms embargo, which she was against. Not yelling at protesters, telling them I'm speaking when they're obviously very concerned about family members that they have in Gaza or the West Bank. That was a terrible response there. Having a strong economic agenda like Bernie Sanders did, going out and talking to younger people and exciting that base like Bernie Sanders did, running a 50-state strategy and not just focusing on the swing states like Bernie Sanders did. Obama also ran a 50-state strategy. A lot of people forget, but there are a number of things that she could have done, but ultimately, I don't think she was going to win. And there's a number of reasons. Number one, Joe Biden took too long to drop out of the race. And I said that from day one, didn't leave a lot of time. There's still things she could have done to improve her chances, but didn't leave a lot of time. Number two, Kamala Harris was selected. No one voted for Kamala Harris in the Democrat 2024 primary. And I would argue, had there been a real primary, she probably would not have won the primary, just like previously. Think about the people that were running against Joe Biden. You had Marianne, you had Dean Phillips, you had RFK before he left the Democratic Party. I would argue if they would have had a real primary process where there were debates, I would argue that probably RFK or even Dean Phillips probably would have beaten Joe Biden.
Agreed. Especially RFK. Yeah. Agreed.
Yeah.
Sorry, please continue.
Yeah, I would argue they probably would have won that primary. Again, they're not my candidates because, again, like they're all pro-Israel.
Mm-hmm.
But I think they still would have beaten Joe Biden, and Democrats probably wouldn't have been in this situation. But they didn't hold a real, true primary. You know, it's interesting too. Professor Alan Lichtman, as much as he likes to talk about his 13 keys, what Professor Allen, I feel like he had a little bit of bias as well this time around. What he didn't seem to understand is that his 13 keys predicted a Trump win. It didn't predict a Harris win. It didn't predict a Biden win. You're talking about social unrest. Not only were there protests in this country for over a year and in the world for over a year for Gaza, but on top of that, you had like viral songs. Macklemore wrote viral songs bashing Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. There were songs about you. So how would you, I don't understand how people could have sat by and said, there's no way people are going to elect Donald Trump again. What do you mean there was no social unrest? Yeah. The kids were camping out on the campuses. The police were bashing kids' heads in. There were over 500,000 people marching in DC across the entire world. What do you mean there was no social unrest?
What is wrong with liberals on this thing? I got to be honest, there's a level of arrogance. There's a level of almost assuming that people should vote for you Like, and I think part of the reason why they think Kamala Harris ran such a great campaign is because Kamala Harris did exactly what they think, meaning in their mind, well, he's obviously a fascist and a woman abuser, and he has all of these criminal indictments. So clearly nobody's going to vote for him. Kamala Harris has attacked Donald Trump viciously. So obviously this is enough to win the race. And it's like, but the rest of the public doesn't care. Like, meaning they are focusing on items of and whatever I think about Mayor Adams has no F's to give recently. And in many of these interviews, he's pointed out, look, man, people don't really care about this fascist stuff. They care about eating and they care about being able to pay their rents. And if we're not dealing with that, then we're not dealing with anything. And even on The View, when they were going after Trump on The View, Adams put him in check, basically saying, look, I know this is your issue. And I'm paraphrasing. I know this is your issue. I know, all of you rich people on this stand, I know you care about the fascist stuff like that. Most people care about how they're going to get their kids to school, how they're going to pay for food, the increases in prices, ensuring people have homes and those type of things, paying for their medical bills. That's what real people care about. Those are their real issues. And because the Democratic Party wasn't dealing with those issues, instead they spent the entire time talking about fascists. Then they missed the boat. But liberals don't see that. And for the life of me, it is deeply aggravating to talk to a liberal on this issue with Trump or anything else. And they are completely blissfully unaware on how they lost this race. It is bizarre to me.
It's a class issue. Again, they don't engage with people that are of a lower class to understand where these people are coming from. There was a recent mayor candidate in New York City posted a viral video on X where he is interviewing working class, everyday New Yorkers, asking them who they voted for and why. And a number of them either said they didn't vote or they voted for Donald Trump and they gave their reasons why. CNN doesn't do that. MSNBC doesn't do that. Where's their man on the street? Why aren't they talking to people, just everyday people? What's with these folks? They get together these focus groups, which these people are obviously selected. They select the people that are going to say things that are a little bit more favorable to the party that they want to win. Why aren't they walking down the street, just interviewing random people, asking them how they feel about it? Again, why? Because they want to present a certain narrative. They don't want you to hear that more New Yorkers were considering voting for Donald Trump. And how'd that happen anyway? How did Donald Trump increase his support in blue New York, in New York City, right? A lot of that had to do with immigration and the economy. Like, they would have known these things had they spoken to those people. But people have to understand, again, a lot of them, Mika, Joe, Sonny, Whoopi, these people are rich. They don't hang out in the same circles that we do.
Like, even if you're just random liberal on the street, they are like in a cult. I had this back and forth with this woman. She was a doctor, and she was talking about Trump and all of this other stuff. Like, oh, Trump gave what is it? Those things they gave tests to Putin, and I'm like, okay. And she's like, that's such a big deal. Why? You don't think it's a big deal? No, I don't. I don't care. It's a world leader dealing with another world leader. Why do I care about this? In her mind, it was super important. And Democrats went with it as if this was super important. And as I was pointing out to her, I said, look, you guys are in a bubble. You guys are elitists. And you don't fully understand why the American public, fundamentally disagrees with you, and why you alienate the American public. She was aghast. Oh, I don't know what you mean. I don't know what you're talking about. It's this. Like this election is a perfect example of that elitism. If you ask the majority of the American public, when they ask which party represents the working class, now Democrats are supposed to be that party. Like, that is literally their entire reason for existence in this political dynamic of left and right paradigm. Most of the public don't believe that, especially not today. And you have a party that's supposed to represent unions and the working class getting beat by a billionaire. And when you ask the American public, they believe that the working class ended up going with the billionaire as being the one that is best suited to their interests. I mean, and this is so significant that even unions, like, you had the situation where the Teamsters did not approve of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and ended up just not voting because the majority of their members were going to vote for Trump. Like, that is astonishing. And they don't see it. They don't seem to be making any moves against it to do anything about it. And when you look at MSNBC, they're talking about trans kids. As recently as the other day, Jen Psaki, the bad press secretary, or former bad press secretary for Joe Biden, does a video that Republicans keep bringing up trans kids as if trans kids was the fulcrum of this election. Like,
right.
They are so, like, the level of out of touchness is astonishing. And they don't fundamentally see it, nor do they seem to be making any moves or changes to do anything about it. It is bizarre to me. I agree with you. It's a class issue. But it's like many of these liberals are not rich. And they still think this way.
They don't have the same needs that a lot of, so like, for example, I tried to tell people from talking to voters on the ground, the abortion issue was not the number one issue for most voters. Right. It really is not. And I've tried to explain it to people. There are a number of women that are pro-choice that still don't believe that this should rest at the national level, that it should belong in the states. So this whole idea of let's run on freedom and reproductive freedom, that also doesn't resonate as a number one issue with most voters. Right. We can say over and over again, it's the economy. And it's not that they don't get it. It's just that they don't really want to fix it. They don't want to address the fundamental issues that the majority of Americans believe are a real problem. They don't want to address the healthcare issue because they don't plan on giving everybody healthcare, because they don't want to push away Blue Cross Blue Shield or Aetna, for example, right? So the Democratic Party is in trouble because they championed themselves for years as being the party that cares about working class people. And they have moved away from that. They became the party of Goldman Sachs and the Ivy League politicians. And now more and more people are starting to see, are you really that much different from the Republican Party, except on some of the social issues? When it comes to the class issues, are you really that much different? And people see, well, no, you're not. And so I have been advocating for a strong, like a third party movement in this country. I think it's long overdue. It really does need to happen. And I think that, I hate to say it, but I think that a lot of liberals who still want to support the Democratic Party, even though they'll have some of the same criticisms that we do about the needs of people in this country, I think it's going to take people hitting rock bottom for it really to resonate with a lot of people that the two-party system is a problem, and they're both corporate and they're owned by, Wall Street and the military-industrial complex. We really need people in office and in Congress, since they're the ones that pass legislation. We really need people in Congress that are looking out for everyday people. And right now, the majority of the politicians in Congress look out for their donors. And that's why most of the time when they pass legislation, it's legislation that has some type of corporate interest attached to it, not legislation to help us. I would argue this is why the squad, decided not to force the vote for Medicare for all. Again, it's like, they're really not trying to go to bat for us. And so some of them decided to go along with dim establishment like AOC. They're trying to make their political career. And I think, as we've seen, others have been pushed out, like Jamal Bowman and Cori Bush. It's just, watch the interview with Ronnie Akalik and Jamal Bowman that recently was posted on Breakthrough News, where Jamal Bowman says that there's no, you can't reform this party.
Wow. Because he said he tried to get them, basically he was going to be an advocate, and nobody got back with him. They didn't seem to care. Last question, Sanders. Give me a take on Sanders. Sanders came out and said Joe Biden is the most, what he said, the most progressive president since FDR. That was the line, the most progressive president since FDR. Now, considering 30% of the people that voted for Obama turned around and voted for Donald Trump, I mean, he clearly knows that something was missing in the Democratic Party under the Obama era. I mean, otherwise Sanders wouldn't have ran if that was the case, if it wasn't something missing. Give me your take on Sanders. And this could be the last question. I got to be honest, I've been disheartened by AOC, by the squad. by their ineffectual nature, by the willingness to kind of lump in line with the Democratic Party. Keep in mind, when AOC got elected, she said, I'm going to primary some folks. That went out the window real quick in her association with Mama Bear, even to the degree of attacking Jill Stein, calling her predatory, as if Jill Stein was the problem and it wasn't the Democratic Party that was the problem. Like, it's outrageous when you think about it. The Democratic Party was sending people to people's houses to try to get them to change their vote for the Green Party. And as one of the guys told them, if you want people to vote for you, you need to change your policies that are more appeasing to people to get them to vote for you. Meaning the Green Party wouldn't be an issue if you had a political party that was representing the interests of workers and you could just subsume the qualities, or let's say the policy of the Green Party. But you don't do that. Instead, you take these lawfare ways of, hey, you didn't dot your I, so we're going to kick you off the ballot. And you do that all across the country, or for that matter, sending people to Green Party people's homes to try to get them to take their names off the ballot. And so Sanders clearly knew that something is wrong with the Democratic Party. And yet he would come out, he would back Joe Biden and say this was the most progressive president since FDR. And then he would add a but, and then he would attack the Democratic Party. And it's like, okay, dude, if the first thing you said is true, then the second thing is unnecessary. Which one is it? And AOC, same way. I have, God, man, they have been such a disappointment. But give me your take on both the squad and Sanders and all of this. And this will be the last question.
Well, they're all characters at this point. I mean, Bernie Sanders has a role that he plays. So does AOC. So does Pelosi. All of Bernie Sanders' policies are over at the Green Party and then more. Right? Like the Green Party also has a reparations platform. Bernie Sanders did not have a reparations platform. So there's all of that over there and more. So people have to understand Bernie Sanders, he takes his marching orders too. So like the leaders of the Democratic Party, they tell them this is what we're going to do. And either you're going to do it or we're going to make sure that you're out of here too. Bernie Sanders, however, is in a unique position because he's a registered independent. So if anything, he should be withholding his vote or support in exchange for some type of demands, but he's not willing to do that either. It makes you wonder what do they have on Bernie Sanders? It makes me wonder about that. So what Bernie tends to do is he will play the game. He will tell you that, you know, this is the most progressive candidate of our generation, et cetera. And then the moment they lose, he'll come forward and say, this was a disastrous campaign. So he's speaking out now and he's criticizing the campaign now. But when Kamala Harris was running, he was not doing this. He was not calling it a disastrous campaign. He said it wasn't as progressive as he wanted it to be. But he said that, yes, I think she will make a great president. Yes, I do consider her to be a progressive. He said this on Meet the Press. So now all of a sudden, the approval for Medicare for all is no longer the litmus test for progressives. Now all of a sudden you can call yourself a progressive and not agree that everybody should have health care in this country, not agree with the $15 minimum wage, which is low at this point. Now anybody can call theirself a progressive. And I blame that on Bernie Sanders. He allowed the Democratic Party, he allowed the Congressional Black Caucus, he allowed the Progressive Caucus to use this word to apply to anybody that was just running through the Democratic Party, whether they agreed with those principles or not. So Bernie Sanders, again, people have to understand his job is to excite the base that otherwise would not turn out typically. Excite the younger people, excite the progressive people to come out and support the Democratic Party, whether that candidate is running on progressive policies at all. So people have to understand when Bernie dropped out, who did he tell you to vote for? When Bernie dropped out in 2020, who did he tell you to vote for? He told you to vote for the same people that he told you to push back against, the establishment, corporate, warmonger Democrats. So that's his role. He is to energize the younger the base that typically would not show up to vote, to get them to come out and support the party. So we cannot, and I would say this to anyone, again, I was a part of the Bernie movement too. But you have to hold Bernie Sanders accountable. You cannot sit here and just say, oh, well, Bernie means well. No, he doesn't. Bernie is playing a game. AOC is playing a game. These people do what they feel they need to do to continue their political careers and to make sure that they have some type of political legacy for themselves. And that's how they're able to still stay there. And that's why people like Jamal Bowman and Cori Bush are gone.
And by the way, it damages the Democratic Party even with that, because what they don't quite get is they allow low quality candidates to get in these kind of positions, as opposed to holding them accountable in a way where they actually are worth a damn. Meaning, if you're going to put out the candidate that is not going to push for certain policies that you know are popular and that you know have a better chance of winning, then that candidate, by definition, has a better chance of losing that race. And say, oh, he's the most progressive since FDR. Okay, people know that's not true. And putting him out there like that has a much higher propensity of losing, as we saw with Kamala Harris. Sabrina, thank you for this. I really appreciate it. And the audience, just so everyone would know, Sabrina Salvati, she's a Boston-based activist, leftist, and podcaster. She's a member of the Revolutionary Blackout Network, a Black-led multicultural network and co-op of everyday people, activists, and allies focused on empowering our communities through education, organization, and direct action. Sabrina, thank you for this. I really appreciate it. You have a good one.
Thank you. Bye.
All right. I am going to take a quick break. Let me get this straight first. There we are. I'm going to take a quick break. We're going to come back with Sarah Bills in about a minute. Don't go anywhere. Jamal Thomas Morning Show, 7 a.m., 10 a.m., news, politics, and domestic and international arena. If you guys dig the content, give it a like, share it, subscribe to it. You can always support it through PayPal, Patreon, or Super Chats. All Super Chats or stickers, if you want to call them, will be read at the end of the show. And I think that is everything. I'll be back in a moment. All right, we are back. My name is Jamal Thomas. This is the Jamal Thomas Morning Show, and I am joined with my guest. We had technical issues last time, but damn it, we're back. Sarah Bills. She is independent journalist, a U.S. Navy veteran, and co-founder of DD Geopolitics. Sarah, thank you for joining me. How are you doing today? You doing all right?
Now, we're not having technical difficulties. I'm just having cold. So I have technical difficulties, but I am coming out from under the weather. So I'm really excited to be here today. This is my first show since I've been very ill. So thank you for having me on, especially after we had to kind of scramble the last time.
It's okay. No, I appreciate you joining me. And I'm sorry you were under the weather. Just had a flu or something.
Traveling.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that. That always sucks.
You just have to remember that it's worth it. Was it worth it? Yep. I'll be sick for a few days. It was worth it. So,
what was it? Wait, you say it was worth it? What was worth it?
I just traveled to Russia. I just got back last week, and I think about 2 days later is when I got sick.
Really?
Yeah.
So, what were you in Russia for? What was the event?
I was speaking at a symposium called Inventing the Future. And it was about basically they're kind of terrified as they look at how we're utilizing AI. And we're using it to kind of oppress people and not really help them. And they're like, why are we not using AI and technology to make people's lives easier and to promote the traditional values? Like, it was basically taking this technology that people can and kind of are already using for nefarious reasons and finding out how we can use it to make people's lives better instead of worse.
See, that's the rub. The people who control technology are the people.
That's what the conference was about.
Yeah.
I closed it with a conclusionary plenary, and that's exactly what the professors were saying. They were like, the reason why we're so kind of terrified of the technology, especially in the West, is because you privatize it.
Right.
And the people that control it, how do you know that you how do you even know what they're like? And you think about it, you're like, yeah, Elon really has all of the power over a large portion of our AI, as well as
Yeah.
the ChatGPT guys. It's kind of scary. It's kind of scary when you think about it.
It's very scary when you think about it. You basically have a 1% that has the financial access and control of all of these technologies. And it's like, okay, well, what are they going to use them for? What are they going to use them to maximize their profit? That's the motive. I mean, like, we create this financial motive that says maximize profit. And when you build whatever, you own it. And of course, if a government says, hey, we need a comp or a product that allows us to surveil people 24/7. Okay, here you are. Here's the product. There's no morality associated with it. There's no ethics associated with it. It's just, we have a piece of technology that accomplishes an objective and we will pay you for it regardless of what that objective is. It's terrifying. I mean, even when you're looking at like automation, for example, automation, let's take out all the moral aspects of it. Automation is going to revolutionize how our society operates. So instead of having taxi cabs, Uber drivers, you're going to have a car that could go from point A to point B automatically. You just put it in. I need to go this place. The car shows up. You don't need a driver. You don't need any of the typical process that you would have with that. It's entirely automated. You go to a store. You go to a checkout counter. They automatically hit your account. You don't necessarily need a person at that checkout counter. All of those people lose their jobs. And then there becomes this larger question of, okay, now that you've been able to automate all of these processes, and good job. I don't want human beings dropping French fries if they don't have to. So congratulations. But now what do you do for the workers? Like, what are these people now going to do for a living that you've automated these positions? Now, that's not a big deal if you had a political space that was flexible enough to say, all right, because these are automated, we now are reorganizing our society where technology is taking a large share of the jobs and human beings have more leisure time to do whatever. That is not the way our society works. And all of the gains from the AI, from technology, is effectively going to a 1% to maximize their profit at the expense of everybody else. And government, who's paid by that same 1%, is not seemingly doing anything about accommodating that new reality. Yeah, they should be scared. It's terrifying when you think about it from the worker standpoint. Everything that a worker has up to this point, if you think of the automated buggy, if you think of elevators that used to go up and down by themselves, those people just lost their jobs. They just lost their jobs. They didn't, there was no welfare for the buggy drivers. Those people had to turn into something else and find something else to do. And that's okay for smaller levels of society. But what happens when that stuff gets into larger economic sectors?
I wonder if they're going to tell us to learn to code again for another 5 years. So they're like, oh, just learn to code, you'll be fine. I'm like, well, the AI is doing the code now. So like, they're really just making humans obsolete. And there's no, just like you said, it's not a, we've made this automated. Let's get you a UBI. It's we've made this automated. Go learn another skill.
Right.
The robot took your job. It's really scary. And places in the East have better social safety nets. So they're like, well, if the workers if the robots take the jobs, then at least the workers are taken care of otherwise. But yeah. And I don't know if you saw yesterday, and I don't want to go too far because I'm sure you have an agenda to talk about, but Elon Musk has now officially said in the TOS that nothing belongs to anybody on Twitter except him. He owns all of it now, and it goes to feed Grok. So to train Grok in his AI. So all of your pictures, audio, and writing, all can be used to train Grok. So we are now effectively, unwittingly, we're actually paying Elon for the privilege of teaching his robots.
We should have there should have been policy early on that people owns their stuff, meaning when they're putting stuff out, they own it. Because let's be clear, Twitter doesn't exist if nobody says anything on Twitter. Or Facebook doesn't exist if no one says anything on Facebook. And somehow that process has been inverted where, we own all of this now. It's like, what do you mean you own all of it? You own my pictures? You own my commentary? You own my videos? It's like, get out of here with that. This stuff is outrageous. But again, when you have 1% paying political leaders $1 billion for a campaign, they tend to be somewhat obedient to those political leaders instead of putting through policy that says people own their work product. You get this nonsense, where they can put it into terms of service. It's outrageous. I have to ask you, starting off, Joe Biden comes out and is trying to effectively start a war before Donald Trump gets in, and is allowing NATO to strike into Russia, because that's effectively what it is. As Putin pointed out, you guys are programming the weapons, you guys are providing the intelligence, and that weapon can't fire without you doing so. You are attacking us. And if you do that, all hell will break loose. Russia has just changed their nuclear doctrine to lower the threshold to allow them to effectively respond if there are these kind of large attacks, or if the existence of the state is at threat, and to do so against conventional weapons. Give me your take on this. What's going on?
Well, they already struck a building in the Bryansk region. Lavrov has just commented on the situation at a press conference for the G20 summit. I believe that 6 ATACMS were launched, and all 5 were shot down with one getting through, making minor damage. So the statement includes the fact that they're perceiving these launches of long-range guided missiles by U.S. military experts as a qualitative new phase of the war from the West. They signal that the West wants escalation, but Russia is firmly committed to the position of presenting nuclear war. There have been no official confirmation from the U.S. on the decision. Moscow will respond accordingly to the U.S. decision on strikes. Lavrov called Schultz's position responsible for refusing to supply Taurus missiles to Kiev and carrying out strikes on Russia. So, I mean, it's another kerfuffle. It's like, this guy told us we could do it. Like, we don't know where the missiles came from. Then the USA goes, well, we never really told them that they could. It's like, it's just kind of like pandemonium before, in this lame duck presidency period. Like, it's crazy. Like, what are we doing here? Zelensky has admitted, like, they're ready to admit that, like, there's not going to be any eastward advancement. I'm just not. At this point, you have to just suspect it's for money laundering and profit purposes, because what could be the reasons?
Yeah, it's wild. It's like, one of my biggest concerns was that Ukraine lost the war, and it was clear that they had lost the war for a while now. And the Western media seems to only now be getting around to the fact that they lost. They are losing territory left and right. Russia has apparently opened up a new front, and they are lacking manpower severely. All right. On top of that, you got this weird story coming out of Western media that Russia is bringing in North Korean troops to fight on the front lines against Ukraine. And it's like, what? It's like, okay, well, show me where this is taking place. Well, we can't show you any of it. You just have to take our word for it. And not just take their word for it. They have started to take it as a flat fact when they're reporting it in the media. And for the longest time, I kept saying, okay, this is stupid. Where are they getting this from? Yeah, Russia has an alliance with North Korea, but there's no evidence that North Korean troops are fighting on the front line. Then they say, we are allowing the ATACMS missiles to be used because North Korean troops are now on the front lines. It's like, okay, here's the canard. There it is. So North Korean and stuff, you can't even show that it's true. Everybody's supposed to take your word for it. And you're using that to justify a dramatic escalation, an escalation that Putin has already said is a red line, and that they will respond not just to Ukraine, but they will respond as if NATO is at war with Russia right off the bat. Like, this is outrageous. I don't even know what to say about that. Like, it's so over the top.
Much like they invent problems for us and then they provide the solutions at a cost, they invent stories for them and then they have to provide the retaliation at a cost. I love the North Korean story because to me it's like most people that I know, even non-pro-Russian people, are like, why would that matter? Like, why would it matter to you if they had North Korean soldiers there? Like, are you dying to just kill North Koreans? Like, that's the secret weapon? Oh, they've got North Koreans there. We must bomb them with ATACMS. Like, it's a very crazy thing. They produced one photo that was quickly debunked as totally photoshopped, and everything else is like, this isn't Ukraine? What are you posting? Like, it's insane. It's really, the info war has gotten to the point where it's almost like lazy.
Well, and Zelensky came out and he effectively, I guess he feels himself right now because of the approval. And let's be very clear. This wasn't an approval that Joe Biden just willy-nilly made. This had to have already been in the works, I guess, waiting for the election to be over with. Zelensky comes out, the guy who Naftali Bennett said was deeply concerned about whether or not he was going to get whacked.
Yep.
Comes out and says this.
They certainly will.
I guess this is on Skype.
Plan to strengthen Ukraine is the victory plan, which I presented to our partners. One of its key points is long-range capabilities for our army. Today, there's a lot of talk in the media about us receiving permission for respective actions, but strikes are not carried out with words. Such things are not announced. Missiles will speak for themselves.
This grifter comes out with a video saying our missiles will speak for itself. Now, let's put this in context. Ukraine clearly has a manpower shortage, has a weapon shortage. They've lost more than 20% of their territory. Russia, their economy is in shambles. They can't even keep the lights on at this point. And he comes out and makes a video like that, pumping his chest out, saying our missiles speak for itself. They are getting crushed. Even in Western media recognizes it at this point. And he's coming out saying this nonsense. He has to know that Donald Trump was pretty clear. And look, I don't know if Trump is going to do this or not, but Trump's positioning is, I'm going to end this war. What do you think is going on here? Are you concerned that Joe Biden is going to escalate this in a way to create complications for Donald Trump before he takes office?
I don't know that it's for the sole purpose of creating complications with Donald Trump. I think that there could also be because they had I won't say a plan because it's clear that we don't have one, but I would say like they have objectives that they want to get done, and now they only have this finite amount of period to do it. And whether it's to get more money or more contracts in place or just destroy more Russian infrastructure, whatever it could be, or provoke Russia, they have a finite amount of time now, like 2-3 months, to just get all of it packed in. So that could be it. They could have also just said, like, F it, let the leash off Zelensky and give him what he wants. He did say not too long ago, he's like, they said, what do you need, money or weapons? He said, I have enough money to get to 2026. How? I don't know. But then he was like, I want the weapons. And like, it was about then when they started talking about the missiles again. And it's like, I don't think that they care anymore. It could be also like, that could be a bonus, like not necessarily like a bug. It could be a feature or a bonus. I mean, not necessarily a feature that it bothers Trump. I just think they have a lot of things that they want to do and a lot of assets that they still want to protect in Western Ukraine. BlackRock is even getting nervous that Russia's getting too close to the land that they own. Yeah. So this is also has private companies involved in it and their special interests, which you don't even know what companies they are. So how could you know what the special interests are? But we do know that BlackRock is there and they're rapidly losing ground that they've purchased. And Russia won't be giving that back. So it could be some of that. It could be a lot of things, but well, I think just let Zelensky say whatever he wants. So just go let him talk to the media. Who cares?
Yeah, he is. Oh God, man, I so deeply dislike him. I don't like. I hate this idea of foreign leaders allowing other countries to damage your population. So, for example, Schultz has been begging for a call with Putin for weeks. Now, he's been begging for a call because his own political situation in Germany has effectively collapsed. And the government in Germany has collapsed over this notion of Ukrainian funding. Because the question came up was like, okay, so why are we giving the money again? We're giving the money to keep the war going. But they've lost the war. So what are we doing different? We're not doing anything different. We're just giving them more money. Yeah. And why are we doing this if we acknowledge that they've lost the war? At which point, the government collapsed. The guy's like, I don't want to keep giving them money if we can't do anything different to change the context of the war. Schultz, who has been running with this nonsense that it was Ukraine that blew up the pipeline, when Joe Biden is literally on video saying, I will stop the pipeline if Russia goes in. So he is, in one sense, blaming Ukraine for blowing up the pipeline, which damaged Germany's from their energy standpoint, in which case Germany has started getting deindustrialized, where their major companies can no longer function properly. And many of those companies even moved to the United States because of the energy costs. And yet they're still giving this country money. Like, it's astonishing, like the position that Germany has allowed itself to be in. I'm saying Ukraine is infinitely worse. You have a situation where hundreds of thousands of people have died in a war that purely never needed to take place, and that Zelensky has been the head of, where Western media at this point call him messianic because he's been so out of touch with reality. Wow. And he comes out here and gives these speeches every so often. Do you know the internal situation in Ukraine right now? I don't know what's going on in Ukraine in the political situation. I know Zelensky has gotten rid of elections at this point. He's effectively King Zelensky.
Yeah.
But is there any political agitation in Ukraine right now to get rid of Zelensky or to do something different than what they've been doing?
Not any different, not any more of an uptick than there was. I mean, there's natural pushback against the population, but, you know, as long as there's money flowing in and then the people are, or the people surrounding Zelensky are perfectly fine with killing their own people in perpetuity. Yeah. But no, there's nothing. I mean, always that government's kind of a mess. He did mention recently that it's called the Rada. He did mention recently that he would be trying to hold the elections in 2025. So we're dangling another carrot to kind of keep things going again. The likelihood of there being elections in 2025 is so slim. I mean, so just empty promises and stuff like that. Yulia Tymoshenko tried to take over, or was kind of inching at taking over not too long ago, but that kind of died out. And I think that a lot of them think like, why would I want to lead? Why would I become a captain of a sinking ship? I'll just reap the benefits while I still can.
Right. What do you think Ukraine looks like at the end of this? Or is there even a Ukraine? Like, from your point of view, I guess the first question is, do you think Trump is legitimate in wanting to end the war?
No, wanting, yeah, he could want in one hand and like throw up in the other and see which one fills up. Like, I think he wants to. He would love that because it's bad for business. Ukraine's not a really big business interest for the Trumps. They're more of a Arab Gulf states kind of family. Like, their money's not in Eastern Europe. Their money's in the Gulf, the Arab Gulf and stuff like that, in Israel. The Biden family and the Democrats have a huge vested interest in Ukraine. So I think for Trump, it's more along the lines of, it's not a humanitarian thing. It's not an I like Putin thing. It's that's bad for business for us. We don't need Ukraine. And other than that, like,
by the way, he said as much.
It worries me that all of these world leaders are willing to go along with the charade. I mean, some will tiptoe around it, and like Georgia Maloney will be like, I don't really like that. But in the end of the day, they'll just hold the immigrant issue and her into a corner, and she'll do what they say. It's very scary that all of these leaders, there's clearly something that there's like Schultz, you have humiliated your country. Yes. Your government has fallen apart, rightfully so. Your economy is gone. You were the economic powerhouse of the European continent. Like, you were the leader of the continent, and now you are not. And that something tells me that either he's that dumb or that there's something incredibly nefarious that was like, I'm willing to sacrifice my whole. Even Annalena Baerbock said, I don't care what the people say. We're going to continue to do what we want.
Yeah, she is. I am so attracted to that woman, but she is a lunatic. I swear to God, she is nuts.
Oh my God.
Just to be honest, right? She is nuts. I mean, the notion that a leader would come out and say, I don't care what my population thinks or my population wants. And by the way, they went further in other interviews where she pointed out, yeah, we've had to take money away from rail. We had to take money from all of these other institutions. But, you know, we have to keep supporting Ukraine. And again, the United States is not completely absolved from that. I have the clip of Jen Psaki where Jen Psaki said, our values are not without consequence, or our values are not without cost. And what she was talking about was, you know, we used to get 700 million or 700,000 barrels of oil a day from Russia. And when that stopped, inflation obviously went up because oil costs went up in regards to industries and everything else. We had to pay for that. And so she's like, yeah, our values are not without cost. Okay, fair enough. Then don't come later on saying
it costs us. These are my values.
That we're stuck with paying, by the way.
Who is this we? I'm not this we. These are my
we're not part of this we. And that's the other part, right? They always have this we, like all of us are together. I don't know what they have on Europe. Europe, when I was over there, I covered the elections, the European elections.
Oh, cool.
And when you talk to people on the ground, and even talk to other Europeans, they would say, well, we think the US is the leader. We think the US knows what they're doing. In another part, they would be more like liberals here in the United States. And they would say, well, I think those people who are pushing for right-wing parties are racist and they hate immigrants. And as I would point to myself, but you don't see how our invasion of Syria, for example, and trying to overthrow the Assad government, while all of these Syrians ended up going into Europe, destabilized and altered the politics of Europe. Oh, we don't see that. It's like, what do you mean you don't see it? Like how, like they are so blissfully unaware of how U.S. policy around the globe screws over Europe. At least some of them are. At least some of the ones I talked to were. They just don't see it. They fundamentally don't see it. And their world leaders have this, I want to call it racist on some level, view of their own supremacy, with the U.S. being the leader of that 15% of the globe that they believe that they're going to maintain some kind of level of supremacy, like they're a garden, missing the fact that, A, they've been deindustrialized, and as a standpoint of a world power, Europe is not even on the list. The United States doesn't care what Europe thinks. Do you remember when the JCPOA happened and Trump pulls out and Europe is like, well, we're going to stand by the JCPOA? How long did that last? How long did that last? It didn't last much of any time because they couldn't keep up.
No.
Yeah, it's just bizarre. I got to be honest. I used to have this thought that Europe was smarter.
No.
They're not.
It appears that Eastern Europe is wising up, and I think that's just because of the pragmatism, and Eastern Europe just moves at a slower pace, so they get to like observe all the mistakes while they try to catch up. But I really couldn't believe it. I think it was 2023 where I said, guys, we have watched 3 of history's greatest empires be taken out by the United States, and that was Germany, France, and the UK. France fell apart. It lost all of its colonial holdings in Africa. I mean, they almost lost them to the United States, but they kind of swerved over to Russia really quickly. But and the United States would have been fine with that, with taking up all of the spoils of the French being kicked out of Africa, which is literally would have never happened had Ukraine not happened. Right so there. It's like all they know. Americans aren't like American politics aren't. Politicians aren't that dumb. They understand the domino effect of that. And then you have Germany, the industrial powerhouse, and you took away their energy source. What did you think was going to happen? And it's like, we've watched these, and I really love Central Europe. And I think that the United States has done their best due diligence to keep France and Germany from ever being in a position where they could be autonomous to the point where they could become their own superpower. And so, I mean, if you look at all of our world's wars, they're about keeping Germany and France, or keeping France and Russia apart and keeping Germany down and not allowing them to prosper. And you have to wonder, was that all part of it from the beginning?
That's a good question. I mean, because we complained about Nord Stream for like a decade. I mean, and, they had been attacking. When I first got the job, Nord Stream, and I was like, what the hell is this pipeline stuff? Why are they concerned about this pipeline? And after they blew it up, it became far more clear on the reasons why they didn't want this pipeline to exist. This breaking the linkages between Russia and Europe, breaking the linkages between Russia and Germany specifically. From your point of view, though, how does this war end? Like, let's say, because I wasn't sure if it was going to be a certain level of cynicism where they said, okay, well, we're going to bog the Russian military down. And so we're not going to make a deal. We are going to let it collapse and Russia take it all, in which case now we're going to have this guerrilla war on the Ukrainian soil that can occupy Russia for the next decade. I wasn't sure if it was going to be something like that, which was probably the most cynical approach to it, or if it was going to be something different. I guess now that Trump is in, it's probably going to be something different, even though, honestly, it could still do that, depending upon what Trump decides to do. Whether he cuts baits, it's like, okay, I'm not going to go into the sunken loss fallacy of keep putting bad money after good. This is Joe Biden's war. I'm calling it a day. Those territories are yours. We're going to stop NATO expansion. This is over with. We're now going to focus on China. I don't know if it's going to be that, or if Donald Trump is going to try to save face for America in some way to get something out of it. I mean, how do you think this ultimately unravels? Give me your take on it.
Your experience with European and Russian politicians, I don't know that the Trump administration understands politics at the level that Russia does. So their plans that I've heard from the Trump administration are kind of silly. DMZs and, demarcated zones and demilitarized zones. Putin will not go for that, because on the other side of that is either going to be BlackRock and their guerrilla army, or Poland, who is now armed to the teeth. And so there's the choice of, do we allow Ukrainians to hold on to their own rump state, which is already going to cause derision because they don't want a rump state. And just like you said, they have these neo-Nazi guerrillas. We've already positioned Poland to become the new Ukraine by overarming them and putting them on the hook for a huge military expansion. So are they now tasked to defend Ukraine? We also have the threats that have come from Zelensky that said, if you don't give me what I want, I've got a continent full of Ukrainian refugees and black market weapons, and we'll do whatever we want. So this is a very tenuous situation, which is one of the reasons why I think that Zelensky's kind of gutsy enough to come out and say, yeah, we've done it, because he knows that he's also got some leverage in this. There's threats that he's made. He's helping keep weapons lines open that go all the way down into Africa. So there's a lot of things going on here. I don't know what Trump and Vance's interests are in Ukraine. I know that they're friendly with BlackRock to a fault, but they have very vested interests in Poland. Both Trump and Vance have vested interests in Poland. So I don't think that they will allow Poland to have this sort of guerrilla, volatile state on their border. But on the other hand, they mentioned South and North Korea, which would just be a disaster. It's just not the same kind. They were like, let's do a North and South Korea sort of scenario with a promise to integrate or something along those lines. And it's just like, no, that's
not what happened.
South Korea. You ruined that peninsula. They want to get back together now. So what? Let's not do this again.
Yeah, I don't believe for a moment that Putin is going to invest. By the way, super pragmatic, didn't want a war, did everything in his power to avoid a war. And what people don't quite get, I think, is that there are some hardliners in Russia, and Putin's not one of them.
No, they want it all.
Yeah. I mean, but I have a hard time believing that he's going to invest this much blood and treasure after being lied to in the Minsk agreements by Western powers, that he's going to agree to any kind of partition. I get the sense that their objective is to end this as an issue, meaning this notion of having Ukraine potentially always joining NATO or Georgia potentially joining NATO. I get the sense that, no, we're going to solve this issue now. We've invested this so much blood and treasure. We're going to solve it. This is going to be resolved one way or the other. And if Trump doesn't quite get that, then Trump is not going to be able to end the conflict. And that's the thing that terrifies me most about Trump coming in. Whether or not he has sense enough to basically put this issue to bed, especially now considering what Joe Biden is doing. This is outlandish. The Putin comes out and says very clearly, you will be at war with NATO if you do this. Okay. And Joe Biden initially pulls back. Apparently the Pentagon was very clear, don't do this. What you get out of it is not worth what you are risking.
Yeah.
And then he loses an election, meaning loses the argument on this very specific issue, and then blows off what the American public has effectively said. And it's like, yeah, we're going to allow now Ukraine to strike into Russia. Now, he may believe that because Trump is coming in, that Trump may do something different. And so Russia doesn't want to risk a nuclear war when the next administration may be more favorable to putting it into the conflict. I don't know what Joe Biden is thinking on this. But God, man, this is super risky.
It's hugely risky. But I think that we need to watch the situation with the recent strikes with the ATACMS and how America kind of reacts to Zelensky, because the way that I'm seeing it is them just kind of like, we're in a lame duck period. Just do whatever you want. And it's like, I don't know. We're in like very strange, scary times. I woke up to a message from my colleague that just said, "Good morning, happy World War III," and I was like, "What? I am going on a show and
Right.
we're always the last to know." So like, this is really, people are like panicking quite a bit, and I don't. And I think like they've kind of put this Ukraine and Russia thing on the back burner, and now they're like, wait a minute, this is still kind of going on. We've been paying attention to Israel, Palestine. You guys are attacking. You guys are bombing mosque, like Russian infrastructure and stuff. Like this is, people are getting quite nervous. And I also think that Trump has some sort of a respect for Russia that Biden just doesn't in a way.
Agreed.
There's Trump has a better reverence, and I don't like either of them. So let me just put that out there. But I don't like the American politicians. But Trump has a much better reverence for history, and he is much more an admirer of power and strength and like and masculinity and all of that. And that's a very like, Russia's very attached to that. Biden and them don't care about that. They actually go the opposite. Like, you hate the gays, you hate. Like they kind of go the other way. Like we don't like you because of this. And Trump's more along the lines. I like Putin. He's a strong guy. He likes Xi. He's a strong guy. He likes Kim. He's a strong guy. So I think there's a little bit more of a respect there. So hopefully, like when he gets in office, maybe that changes for Russia. But honestly, when I was in Russia, they just said, we don't care as long as they don't bother us. So every guy's elected. We just don't want them to bother us. We have objectives and we're going to achieve them, whether you like them or not.
Yeah, leave us to our devices. And we'll leave you to yours. Yeah, I mean, we don't believe in that here. We don't believe in leaving people to their devices. That's not the way we function. I'm curious, how did you start D&D politics? By the way,
we started in 2022 when the SMO started, and then eventually just grew. I started reporting on it with one other colleague, and then we eventually moved to Telegram, and then I'm invested in most of Eastern Europe and the Middle East. And we started reporting on everything. And eventually it just grew. And now it's sort of this interesting independent journalism research collective that sort of just kind of works together. It's nothing official. We have no state sponsors. We're looking for some. So if there are any specific, like North Korea, if you'd like to sponsor an independent news agency, we'd love to have you. But no, it's really neat because it's a lot of volunteers and a lot of people that just do it because they genuinely love what they're doing. Or our cause is just multipolarity. Like we just have to get through this and get through the birth of multipolarity. And I'm
glad you put it that way, because that's the way I see it too. I get the sense
it's all this. Yep, we're nursing this baby. We're nurturing this like pregnancy. We've been doing this, and then here comes like the horrible no epidural birth. But this is what we're going to have to endure. And the only way we're going to be able to endure it is if we give people like hope, and we explain to them that once you do step out from behind this curtain, there are going to be other people here that understand. I think that there's a lot of Americans that are terrified. They're like, what am I going to lose with this multipolarity thing? Right. And it's like, you have a lot more in common with a worker in Iran than you do with Elon Musk. Like, I don't understand where the disconnect is. So that's where we're kind of trying to get. And that's why we have such a huge multifaceted, we're international in 25 countries now, I think. So, and we have all these perspectives and all of these resources. It's just a really beautiful thing, but we don't make any money or anything like that.
I get the sense that multipolarity is the first step to, I guess, world polarity, like where it's not, I'm a citizen of a country, I'm a citizen of the world. And I know that is far, far in the future in the way that any conception of it, and it's difficult to even conceive of. But if you think of it, the World Wide Web and internet is the thing that makes multipolarity even possible on some level. Like the ability, if what was taking place in Israel right now in Lebanon took place, let's say 500 years ago, nobody would know. Like the only people who would know would be world leaders, as opposed to now, you can open your cell phone and be like, oh my God, they're murdering people and committing a genocide. And you can watch the genocide as it happens. And so when Israel comes out, they're like, no, they were hiding bombs in toasters. Well, you can say, well, dude, I just watched you murder this child that was just running away. I just watched you kill this person with a flag. I just watched you take down an entire apartment building to get one dog catcher that might have worked for Hamas that you don't even know if it was there or not. Like, it allows you to be connected with people that you, under normal circumstances, would in no way be able to even know exists.
And it makes you be like, I'm not the crazy one, right? You're seeing what I'm seeing, and then some Italian person is like, yes, and you're like, okay, thank God. And so now we're actually at this terrifying precipice where it's like, you're lying. You know, I know that you're lying, but you're still lying to me. Why are we doing this?
Yeah, this thing. But I guess my point is, with the multipolarity thing, I agree with you that it's a birth, and I love the way you put it. It's like no epidural in the back of a car with bombs going all around trying to get this baby out. It's that, but I would say that in the same way that the U.S., I know there are a lot of Fukuyamas saying that this is the end of history. The United States won. Well, it wasn't a multipolarity. It wasn't a unipolar generation. It was a unipolar moment.
Yeah.
And I think what we're realizing is that moment is over with. And the biggest concern is that they don't recognize that that moment is over with. And they keep trying to push this notion of supremacy in a world that fundamentally doesn't want it. In the old days, you can make the argument, and you could say, well, the U.S. is love and justice with freedom and light. Look at Superman. He is holding the American flag. That is the ideals that we believe in. And you have the Soviet Union, which has this repressive regime that is in power, etc. And so you can make that argument to the rest of the world that we are a better engagement. We're a better actor. We are the people that you want to engage with. Fast forward, where you get China, Russia, India, South Africa, coming together saying, okay, we're going to join BRICS. We're going to create this organization. And as a tenet of it, we're all equals. We're not going to sanction one another. We're not going to invade into the politics of the various countries, like in these overthrows and everything else. We are going to use peace as a means of engagement with other countries. That is what we are. That's what we represent. And you get the U.S. saying, well, wait a minute, we're a hegemon. We believe in hegemons. We need to have a hegemon. We need to be the indispensable nation around the globe. Okay, which one of those arguments work better? Obviously, not the hegemon argument. So I guess my point is, and this is a long-winded way to put it, I agree with you. I think we're coming into a new norm in regards to what society or world society is trying to be, and what these kind of intransigent forces of the West, who consider themselves supreme, consider their place a garden, consider themselves just fundamentally better as human beings and morally better, is shown to be a canard. It's shown to be false, especially if you're looking at Gaza. You're looking at this argument of rules-based, and you realize that the rules change depending upon when America and the West want it to change. I think the world wants something different. Give me your take on that.
I do. I think the Americans are legitimately, they're very, very fearful of it. You'll hear it even them. It's still this kind of cleaving onto the most basic things that make them like, I'm white, I'm Catholic. And it's like, all right, that's when you know that we're starting to backslide, and they're starting to lose the power. So while we're having these crazy people that are like, I'm white and Christian and I should rule America, that's a good sign. It's actually a good sign, because it means that the power is receding, and now people are clamping onto anything that they think is going to give them power. I mean, that's a really, I know people see it and they're like, this is bananas, but it's actually a good sign, because that means that some sort of power structure is crumbling. That's also so you'll see in America where they get insane. In Europe, they're getting more nationalist, but all of these are good signs for multipolarity, because they're not sustainable. Right? Once you get into these like extremities, like these extreme views, they're not sustainable. You know that they're not sustainable.
But are you concerned about Thucydides Trap? Like, are you concerned?
Wait, are you psychic? I literally wrote a lecture on Thucydides Trap 2 nights ago. And I'm going to present it on Twitter.
No, I haven't seen it. I just, it's something that I've been thinking about and concerned about. Because initially I thought it was going to be country based, like this notion, let's say like Austria, Hungary, Austria wants to teach Serbia a lesson, and so it decides to use the killing of Archduke Ferdinand as a justification for all of these policies that they knew is going to start a war. I used to think initially it was going to be country based, whether it was US and China or US and Russia. That's not the way it's functioning, though. It seems to be breaking down into the West as a conglomerate led by the US versus literally the rest of the world led by China and Russia as being, let's say, the fulcrum or the base of the rest of the world trying to come up with something different. Give me your take on that. I mean, are you concerned that that sparks off into a larger conflict, or do you think we'll work our way through it in some way?
We have to work our way through it, but I like your view on that. It's more of the West kind of versus the global South and a little bit of the East, whatnot, and what have you. And I think that makes it better. You don't want it to be this clash of titans. You don't want it to be the United States versus Russia nuclear war. But as we're watching, because I keep on calling it World War III, and there's just different fronts and different hotspots. This is World War III. We're in a huge information war. We're detangling Africa and decolonizing it. We have the genocide and what's happening in the Levant. We have Balochistan is getting kind of hairy. We have Armenia kind of being weird. Georgia's embroiled in protests right now. So yes, this is all part of the war. This is all part of getting the West sort of out and cleansed out of these places. Again, the power is receding. You can tell that they're spread so thin. They're trying to put hands on every hole in the dam, and eventually the dam's just going to crack. I do like that. I like that viewpoint because, and it's important to stress stuff like that because people that are dissatisfied with America, either they live in it or the West, either they live in it or they feel victimized by it. This is something that they too can get behind. It doesn't necessarily have to be a violent rapture, but it needs diplomacy and people that have vested interests in it. And we can hopefully avoid the trap. But I'm still going to do the very boring lecture, guys. So it's not very interesting. But I think we are going to be able to avoid that trap because it would have been like, I think it's Graham Allison. Is that his name? Graham Allison that wrote about the China-America relationship becoming a trap, and China would be the rising power that they would eventually have to go to war. And I think that we might be able to avoid that because China doesn't want a war. And so
they don't want a war, but China wants a win-win relationship, and the U.S. fundamentally doesn't believe in win-win relationships. We're a zero-sum country.
We lose. I win and you lose. So
yeah, that's what we think. I mean,
that's
even
part of it. That's a huge part of it is trying to get, and even in Andrei Martyonov's new book, he talks a little bit about, not from this sense, but it was more of a bipolar war, Russia-United States war. But throughout the book, the central theme was the hubris of the West that's the downfall. Like they're so blind to even see what's the writing on the wall right now. And it's like, there's a lot of countries that are sort of, putting their toe in the water of BRICS or maybe reaching out and seeing what kind of other interesting, like, diplomatic relations they can make, and you just don't see any of that from the United States. It's all just hubris and ego. It's like, well, we don't have to do that. And it's like, you're gonna be very sorry you didn't in like 2 to 5 years. So
yeah, that's the part that terrifies me because hubris can get you into horrible places. I would argue Ukraine is an act of hubris.
100%.
Like the idea that, well, Russia doesn't get a security, security guarantees, or Russia doesn't have a sphere of influence. It's like, are you out of your mind? Like, and then to fall ass backwards into this kind of conflict where in their mind, well, we have the economic might to economically destroy Russia. Okay, A, you don't. You just don't. It didn't happen that way. And we're going to destroy the Russian military. Okay, well, the Russian military is nearly 1 million men strong. So that didn't work either. And you would think that at some point there would be some recognition of failure, like on a massive effing level. And the fact that they've gotten like 500,000 people killed doesn't seem to matter, doesn't seem to apply. The fact their own economies are being torched doesn't seem to matter, doesn't seem to apply. It seems to keep on ticking along. Georgia, for example, go into Georgia for a minute. They seem to really be trying to use Georgia as a second front.
Again, we're going to do this. We did this in 2008. It's like, aren't you guys exhausted? So interestingly enough, in Georgia, they try every couple of years. In the last 3 years, they've tried every year to do, I wouldn't call it a color revolution because it just can't be sure, but they were definitely staging huge NGO protests. This year, it was the largest that we've seen, which was during the parliamentary election.
Right.
And, and Georgian Dream won by a landslide. They won like a super majority in the parliament. And then, we get the elections rigged. And it was really interesting to kind of watch that the only people protesting were foreigners and people sponsored by NGOs. And it fizzled out. I was like, well, that's pretty cool. At least the Georgians that I spoke to were like, well, we already kind of knew. They do it all the time. But so then you see that instead of now in Tbilisi, the the protests have erupted in Abkhazia, which is a breakaway republic. For your listeners, it's a breakaway republic inside of Georgia that has kind of gone back and forth, vacillating between Georgia and Russia. And for the last 30, 40 years, it has preferred to be more Russian. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, after this election in Georgia that the West deems fraudulent and rigged, protests erupt in Abkhazia telling them that they don't want to get close to Russia. So it's like, oh, you're just going to start with the breakaway republics then if you can't deal with the actual state? Like, how desperate are you guys? This is like a tiny little enclave, smaller than like Manhattan. What are you doing? Like, you're starting protests in like separatist states? It's bizarre. But
do you think that's going to push them closer to Russia? I mean, because if it was me and I will see stuff like that, I mean, for example, the FARA stuff. So Georgia wants to pass the FARA law.
It passed. That's good.
Flips out. And I remember I was at work, I was like, how are we flipping out about them? We have a FARA law.
Ours is stricter.
Yeah. It's like, how are we flipping out about that? And as I pointed out, the only reason you would complain about a FARA law is if you want to actually do stuff that the FARA law tries to prevent. And what the FARA law was trying to prevent was foreign influence into their elections. It's just weird.
Exactly. And you're like, why would you protest that? And that gave a lot of people pause. And I feel like you mentioned the interconnectivity of the internet and social media, and a lot of people expressed that. I was kind of impressed because I remember being geopolitical commentator maybe 2019, 2020, people would have been like, is that in Atlanta? And I would have been like, no.
Right.
That's an EU flag. But now they're like, why does the United States care about their foreign agent laws unless they're foreign? I'm like, the president is a Western foreign agent. So and so then they're like, oh my God. And then it's like, but yeah, these hotspots along that Eastern bloc, that's former Soviet bloc, Georgia, Armenia, they're always a good guarantee. And now you have the Slavs over in Slovakia, and maybe sometimes people say Hungarians are honorary Slavs, but they're all getting together and saying no more. We don't want to do this with Europe anymore. So they're going to have to rely on the Caucasus as their central hotspot to provoke Europe or to provoke Russia if Ukraine can't be it anymore.
Well, Ukraine doesn't seem to be up to the task.
Yeah, Ukraine ain't it. That ain't it.
They're not it. And I get that said Georgia, considering the FARA law that they just.
Sorry, Georgia, you're up next again.
Yeah, they don't seem to want it either. Sarah, thank you for this. Is there anything that you guys are looking at that's that we should be paying attention to? And this could be the last question that we may be missing, or that might be outside of our shot.
We are going somewhere for Christmas, very special trip to a very special war zone. Please, if you guys could visit ddgeopolitics.com for ways to get involved, participate, or donate. That would be awesome. And we're going to hop on a show with Rebar in a little bit if you guys are interested in actual Ukrainian front updates. So on our YouTube, I think it's in 2 hours. Yeah. But other than that, I just woke up. So I woke up in World War III. So I'm still...
So you're still getting your bearings in this new world.
Bearings. I'm like, where do I go? Where's the bomb shelter? Do I live near any nukes? Which I do. It's like where?
Well, Russia is apparently building bomb shelters in mass now, and getting those things out. That is, Are you allowed to tell what that war zone is by chance?
Oh, Donbass, most likely, yeah. Donbass. The guys will probably be going over to Donbass, yeah.
You are. God, it sounds weird for me to say this. I was going to say you're deeply fortunate to be able to take that trip. I would love to go to that region.
I'll text you after this live. We'll talk after the live.
I am not going to be able to make that trip.
That's fine. There's not only one trip, Jamal. Don't worry.
For the longest time I wanted our station to send us, because our station sends us all over the world when there are events. We did the Biden-Putin summit. We did the Brazilian elections with Lula, all that stuff. And they ended up sending Wyatt to Donbass in order to cover.
Oh God, that's when Wyatt almost died.
He was. They blew up. The place where he was staying. He just so happened was I think he said it was 100, 200 feet away. I was talking to Wyatt after that happened, and he was just dude, they blew up my place. They blew up my place.
Yeah, he was freaked out. I remember that.
Yeah, he was freaked out by that. But it's war. And I guess my feeling is if you're covering a war, it helps to be able to see what it's like in real terms in order for you to get a real sense of what's taking place on the ground. But no, they said Wyatt. I didn't get the opportunity. And I hate saying opportunity because it's war, but I don't know the other language to use for it. So when you go, be very careful. We want to have you back, and we want to be able to have a talk with you about what you're seeing on the ground. So
thank you. And we will talk soon.
Absolutely. Sarah Bills. She is independent journalist, U.S. Navy veteran, and co-founder of D&D or DD Geopolitics. All right, guys, we have come to the end of this show. My name is Jamal Thomas. I run from 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. Monday through Friday. And of course, I pop in at all times of the day and night. I want to thank all of you. And as she pointed out, there has been an attack on Bryansk, I believe, right here. So it has not taken Zelensky long to put those missiles to use. Air defense have intercepted 5 U.S.-made projectiles and damaged another, the defense ministry in Moscow has said. Here's the thing. The effectiveness of Western armaments has shown itself to be lacking. And a lot of this has to do with Russian ingenuity. In the very beginning, they were able to make their hits. But over time, Russia's air defenses, and not just air defense, cyber defense and electronic warfare has been extreme in a way where they've been able to limit the capabilities of Ukrainian military using these weapons while maximizing their capabilities against Ukrainian electronic warfare. Part of the way they do this is by hooking their missiles, or for that matter, drones, up to wires that would allow them to attack without the level of interference that could be put up by electronic warfare. It's actually rather astonishing. And they have had, meaning Ukraine, no defense for it. By the same token, they have been able to minimize the damage done by these weapon systems of the West. So when they point out that they've been able to damage the majority of them, that is normal. That is normal. That is not an abnormal thing. Hold on one second. There we are. And just to show this again, when they put out that they've been able to damage incoming rocket fire, that is not abnormal. That is the normal context of the war, which is the reason why Ukraine has been losing so many men and so much material. But again, that's secondary to the point. It was a red line. That red line has been crossed. Putin has updated the nuclear doctrine in order to lower the threshold for attack. So if they are hit, or if there is a large barrage of weapon systems coming into Russia from Ukraine, because Ukraine is working with nuclear powers, Russia has now been able to lower the threshold of their nuclear weapon systems to potentially respond in a nuclear fashion, depending upon the attack that is leveled at Russia from Ukraine and the United States and NATO proper. We are in a very dangerous moment. We are in a very dangerous moment. It is outrageous that a president loses an election and loses on the issue of foreign policy, ignores what the American public has said on that issue of foreign policy, and decides to maximally escalate the conflict to the point where they are now allowing NATO to take strikes in Russia, using Ukraine as the proxy to do so. That is outrageous, and that can easily get us into a third world war where the escalation becomes unrestrained. You have allowed a country that has literally lost the war and is looking to drag the West into a war because they realize that they've lost the war. And you've given them the capability of dragging you into that war. This is true for Israel, but this is also true for Ukraine. Joe Biden is the worst president we have ever had in this country. And hopefully, God willing, he's not the last president we have in this country. To go through some of the chats. Good morning, everyone. Well, good morning back at you, LJ. thank you for joining and thank you for your donation. Anastasia Beaverhausen with the United States, U.S. Nord Stream, the Negaport. Oh, that is interesting. You know, it's funny, when we were talking to Carl Shaw, that was in my mind also. Is there going to be a mysterious accident to the Megaport? That would be another act of war. And that would not affect just China. That would also screw over South America. I don't know. I hope that that's not where we are. I deeply hope that's not where we are. Cheetah, thank you, Cheetah. Back at you. Thank you for the super sticker. Leave a comment, Cheetah. I always like people leave comments. Sir Bike Select, you will not be able to own a driverless car. You'll rent them, and just like Walmart, they'll F up your community. They'll bring us 15-minute city dystopia without you living in a 15-minute city. So Bike Select, I don't know. I mean, look, I've always said that the issue with Uber or Lyft or these driverless cars is that they're owned by the 1%. If they were owned in some kind of public cooperative, I wouldn't necessarily have too much of an issue with it per se. I think our issue more than anything else is that policy, less the technology. Because if you think about it, it's more like the technology is not a magical thing. It's not God-given per se. It's human ingenuity that finds ways to make life easier. The issue is that in making life easier, it is owned by a tiny, tiny, tiny small group of people that really only care about maximizing their profit. And if you're looking at a policy standpoint, I got to be honest, I don't want a human being dropping French fries, or don't want a human being standing in a checkout line doing a repetitive job 8 hours out of the day. Why do we want people with all of the capabilities that they have at their disposal, for good and for bad, but also this capability of making beautiful, awesome things, to be relegated to holding a checkout line with a scanner and doing that for 8 hours of the day? I don't want that. I don't want that. I don't want human beings being minimized, or their capabilities being minimized in that way. And so if we can have technology to do that stuff, I would prefer technology to do that stuff. But of course, then you ended the second problem. How are they going to make money? How are they going to make payments? How are they going to pay rent? How are they going to pay for their driverless car? Or how are they going to pay for just the basic things of life? Well, that's the rub. And I would argue that's a political question. That's not a tech question. That's a political question. How do you organize your society in a way that compensates people, or that ensures that those people have the means to go about their life, if indeed technology is able to take over many of the jobs that make that life? I don't have an answer for that question. And part of the reason we don't have an answer for that question is because of the way we see work. We see it as if the person is not working, they're lazy. And I would argue this point of view has been organized because for all of our existence, survival has been the main point. Meaning you get up, go to work, and you're doing that from point A to point B all day just to make enough ends to feed and house yourself. And of course, often a lot of people, myself included, just like everybody else, struggle with that. Meaning you got to figure out a way to ensure that you can pay your rent. You got to figure out a way to pay for your car. You have to figure out a way to just pay for a decent life. Hell, if you have a kid, those costs go up that much more so. How do you pay for that stuff in a world where technology can take over many of the jobs that those people would typically do? That is a political question. That is not a tech question. So I agree with where you're going with that. I guess where I disagree is that doesn't necessarily create a dystopian society in and of itself. It's more so how it's used and who benefits from it predominantly. It's just so happened that workers often don't benefit. It's more so the 1% that does. So I feel you. I feel your angst on this. I have the same angst. Agree with you. T. Phil, great show today. Thank you, T. Phil. Check out the show yesterday too. It was really good too. I've gotten right many compliments about yesterday's show. And I thank all of you for joining me for that show. And the stage of Beaverhausen. Billionaires could be taxed into oblivion, and our government still wouldn't use that money to benefit the peasants. They hate us. They crush us. But see, billionaires, look, it's not like the capitalists only stop in the economic sphere. Meaning it's not a situation where you have a political sphere and you have an economic sphere and neither of these two things touch. That's not the way it actually works. The fact that a billionaire can turn around and give Donald Trump $100 million in order to win the race, in order to screw over and steal the West Bank, is pretty astonishing. But that is our political system, where you can dump in money equals speech. And because money equals speech, you can't stop a person from screaming to high heaven and using their $100 billion in order to affect public policy. And I guess my point is, our public policy is directly related to the fact that people can give money to these political campaigns in order to do what the politicians actually do, whether that's ship jobs overseas and they can make a lot of money for it, whether that's creating tech that is, where the benefits of it go to a top 1%. Meaning there's not this thing where there's this kind of separation between the economics and the political sphere. Those things are intrinsically linked to one another. It's not that they hate us because they hate us. It's more so they just have preferences based upon who is giving them the money to encourage those preferences. At least that's my take. Take the money out of politics. I think you get different politics. Great analysis. Thanks, Red Dragon. Well, thank you, Red Dragon. We try. Chief Rocka, thank you for that. Shout out to you. Everything goes to help support this show and keep this show a ticking. Leave a comment, Chief Rocka. Always like comments, but thank you. I really appreciate it. Ellie JJ, my opinion, Woodrow Wilson is the worst president. Woodrow, the Federal Reserve. Basically allowing a group of bandits to get tax or get money on every dollar that's printed from that reserve. Base interest is what I'm looking for. Interest on every money. So instead of creating our own dollars without interest, we now have to pay the Federal Reserve a bunch of interest on anything they create. And at this point, we create it out of thin air. So there's that. All right, I'm going to end this. I am getting a bit fatigued. Guys, I want to thank all of you for joining us. We are growing. This show is starting to get actual good numbers, and I want to thank all of you for it. If you are here, give it a like, share it far and wide, subscribe to the channel. You will see me here bright and early Wednesday morning. I think that's everything. Shout out to you. You guys have a fantastic day. The Jamal Thomas Morning Show, signing off. Have a good one, all.